Hello, everyone, and the people around the corner that I can't quite see. And hello to everybody online. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for coming along this morning to hear about innovation loans. My name is Nigel Walker. I'm Head of Innovation Lending at Innovate UK, one of the directors of Innovate UK Loans Limited, a member of the Innovate UK Loans Limited Credit Committee. Before I start properly, I need to go through the usual housekeeping things. As far as I'm aware, there's no fire drill planned, so if the alarms sound, then please take it seriously. I can see exit signs at that side. I'm told that in the event of a fire emergency, then we should follow King's Place staff who will have high-vis jackets and who will escort us in an orderly fashion out to the muster point. This is a nice big venue, so they do things professionally, so I'm glad that's the case because I tend not to. You've seen where the teas and coffees and delightful mini breakfast pastries were. The loos are out that way and sort of to the left and to the left again. This is an Innovate UK event, so as always, the queue for the gents will be really, really long. The queue for ladies will be ridiculously short. We will keep working on diversity. We have women in innovation competition open. We want to work on diversity of all sorts, not just gender diversity, of course. So what are we going to do today? This is a formal briefing event for our innovation loans competition that's currently open, that's open in scope. And historically, when we've done innovation loans and indeed other briefing competitions, we've had someone stand at the front and talk at you for 3 hours with 104 slides, reading out the instructions to you. I've done that a lot over the past year, and I found it really, really hard work because trying to convey energy from here to you when you have this desperately dull 104-page slide deck that we're reading out loud to you, it's just deathly boring. So we thought we'd try and do things slightly differently this time. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about the background of innovation loans, what we're trying to do, what they are, how they're meant to work, to give you some context. And then we're going to talk about where money comes from when you're seeking to finance your growth through innovation. And for that, I've brought together a panel. We've got Sean Beanie, who's just snuck in at the back there, Nick Thompson, who's nearly here, I hope. Or he's on the way. He's been tweeting about being on the way. We have Diana Yin, and we have Ian Tracey who's going to join the panel, and I'll sort of moderate that, and we'll wing it a bit, and hopefully have some Q&A as well. Then we'll have a break because by then you'll need a cup of tea or a glass of water or something like that. Then we will, instead of us reading out the instructions of this is the application form, question 1 says blah blah blah. We've asked the KTN, who've written a fantastic guide to completing a really good project application. We've asked Ian Tracey from the Access to Funding and Finance team at the KTN to come along and give you some hints and tips about how to write a good application, which I hope you'll find more interesting than me just reading out the instructions. And then we will have, instead of us talking about part B of the application, which is about your business rather than your project, we've got a real live member of our credit team who's just arrived, so I'm relieved. So Cat from our credit team is going to talk about our approach to credit, and maybe she'll tell you a few war stories about some of the really good and perhaps not quite so good applications that we've had so far in the previous innovation loans competitions that hopefully you will find useful. And then we'll wrap up. I hope he will get here on time. I'm sure he will be. Stephen Leece from CitiLogik, one of the first companies that was actually a recipient of an innovation loan, has already started drawing down, and hopefully his real life experience will be even more interesting and relevant to you than me standing here pontificating, although I shall continue to stand and pontificate, of course. Then we'll have some lunch. Then there's nothing formal for the afternoon. There aren't any workshops and masterclasses or further presentations, but folks like myself, Kat, I'm sure Ian, and hopefully Diana will stick around and you can have conversations with us, or you can just find a swimming pool. Or it was easy yesterday when I did this. We were up in Cambridge. I could just say, and you can go punting. But here in London, maybe you can stroll by the canal because it's really nice there this afternoon. So hopefully that will be useful. For the folks online on the webinar, hopefully you'll be able to follow along. And when it comes to the Q&A, hopefully we can moderate that. We've got about 100 people in the room here, or certainly we're registered to be in the room here this morning, and another 100 online. So no pressure, panelists, don't worry. Since I'm not reading out the instructions to you, please, please, please take note of this slide. This is where you will find the instructions. So if you go to Innovate UK's website, you will see an overview of innovation loans that will summarise what I'm going to say succinctly, and it's been helpfully co-written by our comms team, so the sentences will be shorter, the words will be shorter. There's general guidance on innovation loans, how they work. There's specifically the scope of this competition, the timings, etc. And there is the guidance for applicants, the detailed instructions that take you through questions 1 through 10 of Part A of the application, the project finance form, questions 1 through 7 of the Part B of the application, and the project financials spreadsheet, which has been described as the spreadsheet from hell, but hopefully is a template that you will find useful rather than staring at a blank screen in Excel thinking, wonder where to start. We tried to start it for you, but it's up to you to use it as you wish, provided that you give us the information that we need. The other thing I would really, really encourage you to do is if you have any questions, if anything's not clear, then please contact our customer support team. Nice group of folks down in Swindon. They're really good at taking phone calls, receiving emails, identifying which competition they relate to, and sending them to people like myself, and then badgering me until I have responded promptly. They're a good sort of quasi-call centre. They have metrics around the timeliness of responses, the completeness of responses, so they will make sure that I do respond to you, whereas if you tweet to me or send me a LinkedIn message, I will probably forget it. So please, please do use the customer support team. If it's practical things like, oh my gosh, how does that FTP site work? They will understand questions like that, which I clearly wouldn't. If it's particularly about the Part B, about financial side of things, they'll involve someone like myself or someone like Kat from our credit team to help you out. So please read the instructions, because I'm not going to read them out to you, and contact customer support. This presentation that we're going to be going through today will be made available to all of you, both in the room and online. And in this presentation deck, if I look at it, I've got 143 slides, and I'm not going to go through 143 slides here because that would bore the pants off you. But within this presentation, we've got what are all the questions, what are all the subparts of those questions. We've got definitions of SME, definitions of undertaking in difficulty. We've got some stuff about the state aid position of innovation loans. We've got the summary heads of terms of our loans in terms of what the agreement will look like if you enter into one with us. So useful information. It complements the guidance online. So if in doubt, the guidance online wins, but we will send these slides around to you, and I hope that they will be helpful to you. So that's sort of my disclaimers and whatnot. Let's get on with the story. Does anybody here not know who Innovate UK are? Okay, cool. I thought that might be the case. I'm really pleased to know that you all know who Innovate UK are. We're the UK's innovation agency. Our role is to stimulate business-led innovation in order to drive productivity and growth in the UK economy. We do that in a couple of ways. One way is through making connections. And I'm really pleased that on the panel today and here with us, we've got the Knowledge Transfer Network, we've got the Enterprise Europe Network. There's also catapult centres, which I hope you're familiar with, in things everything from digital to healthcare and advanced and high-value manufacturing. They're really, really important ways of stimulating innovation because they make connections, they provide support, they do things that money can't buy. Generally, though, people think of us as those nice people that hand out free money. And over the past 10 years, we're really proud of the fact that £2.2 billion of taxpayer funding, when put together with the project contributions that businesses like yourselves have made and from other sources, that £3.75 billion of investment into research and development and innovation, that has led to an increase in the gross value add in the economy of £16 billion. So for every pound of investment in innovation through us as Innovate UK, our taxpayers' money, that increases the value of the economy by up to £7.30. So if you're a Chancellor of the Exchequer or something like that and you're thinking, should I put a pound into a nurse's salary or should I put a pound into innovation? The idea is that that pound investment in innovation will grow the economy in the future, and therefore it's a really, really useful and good thing to do. And those projects that have been carried out by businesses like yours, 8,000 unique organisations, they've grown the economy and they've created jobs. 70,000 jobs created in total, not by Innovate UK, as we sometimes tweet, but by businesses like yours. And we're really, really proud to support them. And innovation loans are part of this. We're not trying to fix the finance issues for smaller businesses in the United Kingdom. That's not our job. That's the job of the British Business Bank. And they do a fantastic job with things like the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme that they administer and work through partners, through things like British Patient Capital that's been announced, through the Angel Co-Fund, through Enterprise Capital Funds, through investing in alternative finance providers. So British Business Bank is there to fix the supply of finance to small businesses in the UK. Innovate UK is there to stimulate innovation in order to drive growth. We happen to use money sometimes, and most often it's been through free money in the form of grants that cover part of the costs of your project. And we're also now experimenting, we're doing a pilot program to see whether loans can be a good way of doing that, particularly for later stage R&D, with a clear route to commercial success, in a way that helps you and also makes public funding work harder and go further. And this is, hopefully on one slide, a really quick summary of what we mean by innovation loans. These are loans to small and medium-sized businesses, only to a single business, not for consortia. Loans that we hope are affordable, that interest rate of 3.7% fixed over the life of the loan. I think you would, I'm probably not allowed technically to say it's affordable because that's a value judgment and I might be offering you advice, but it's certainly cheap. We're not charging fees, and they're loans that we hope are structured and designed in such a way that they will help you carry out that later stage R&D and get into the market and make a successful growing business. So those loans are flexible, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the structure, and that they're reasonably patient. We could lend for as long as 10 years. Our appetite is probably more around the 7 years sort of range, but in exceptional cases we will lend for up to 10 years, which a commercial provider wouldn't do for the sort of risky, technology-led small businesses that we're hoping to attract. We can fund up to 100% of the eligible project costs of a later stage research and development project. And it's something I want to talk about when we have the panel discussion, but there are different ways of funding innovation. One way might be through R&D tax credits. You won't get 100% funding through your R&D tax credits, but you will get something if you're eligible, and you can check on that. You could get a grant. A grant for a feasibility study could get you up to 70% of the project costs covered if you're a micro or a small business, for example, with fewer than 10 employees, or whatever the number is. If you're doing an industrial research project, so effectively proof of concept, you could get up to 60% of your project costs covered, and you wouldn't have to repay that grant. With an innovation loan, you could get up to 100% of the costs covered, and you pay us some interest and you repay the loan. So there are different forms of support for innovation that can be helpful in different circumstances, and what we want you to do is to look at this, think about whether it's right for you, whether you're the right sort of business for us also to consider lending to, and if so, then we'd welcome an application. But it's not for everybody. So we want you really to think about it, and we hope it's really valuable. It's a pilot program that we're running. We have £50 million allocated from Treasury in this pilot. We want to do about 100 loans in the pilot program overall, and therefore the loan size is restricted to £1 million. And we're offering loans of between £100,000 and £1 million. But it has to be focused on a later stage research and development project, technically experimental development, and I've got one really boring slide that will cover that. The other slides are only mildly boring, of course. The funding is just for the eligible project costs of that later stage R&D project. We want loans to be complementary to grants. When loans were first announced back in 2015 by the Chancellor in the Spending Review, a lot of people threw up their hands in horror and said, oh, those horrid people at Innovate UK are going to take away all the grants and that nice free money and they're going to lend us money instead. That's not the case. We're now offering loans as a complement to the grant funding programs that we do. And we think that that grants are particularly suitable for single businesses, particularly SMEs, when you're trying to find and prove a new idea. That is stupidly risky. And because it's stupidly risky, we want to support you in doing that, so you would do something that you wouldn't otherwise do, or to do it more quickly. And therefore a grant can be a really good way to do that. The other time when we think that a grant funding is particularly suitable is when you're collaborating. So when we've got a business working with a research organisation, a university, for example, or one of our catapult centres or another research and technology organisation, or when you've got large businesses and small businesses working together, particularly when whole industries are being transformed. And the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund that's being delivered through Innovate UK and UK Research and Innovation is particularly focused on those transformative challenges, those large societal and economic challenges that represent fantastic, big opportunities for UK economic growth. So grant funding there can encourage collaboration and encourage people to do something, again, that they wouldn't otherwise do, and certainly to do it more quickly. Once you've found and proven that idea, then it becomes, we believe, about scaling and growing your business through innovation. And so innovation loans are aimed there at helping you to do that, still through the lens of an R&D project, but focused on lending to your business. Innovate UK is offering these loans at a stage when they're closer to market, because when it gets to experimental development projects, the grant funding that we're allowed to offer based on the state aid guidelines under which we must work, that grant funding falls down to 45% of project costs for a small or a micro business, or 35% of the project costs for a medium-sized business. And a lot of people don't bother applying then. They go back to the beginning and start doing some more polishing of that piece of kit, which means that it will probably end up being beautifully shiny, which many an engineer and many a scientist will think is fantastic because they're trained to come up with excellence. I'd actually quite like you to flog the dull green one, please. Get into the market, make some money, and then do some more polishing, making it shinier, upsell that shinier piece of kit to the market once you're there. So innovation loans are about trying to get you to get into the market more quickly. This is summarising a lot of what I've just said, so I'll skip through it reasonably quickly. So we want to offer loans to SMEs, to small and medium-sized enterprises, to businesses. Those businesses, we want to be doing really innovative things, cutting-edge innovation, the really clever stuff that you, as technologists, as engineers, as scientists, as innovators, as entrepreneurs, that you understand, and I'm afraid I completely don't, because I'm a banker by background, not a clever person. We want businesses that are growth-oriented, because if your business is going to grow, then you're going to be in a much better position to repay this loan in the future when you have to. If you're a grant junkie, then an innovation loan isn't going to be right for you. I'm allergic to grant junkies, by the way. We want businesses that are thinking more about scaling than perhaps about starting. If you're just starting your business, if you're completely pre-revenue, if you haven't yet raised your first round of capital, then taking on a loan of any sort is probably not a sensible thing to do. You should, of course, take financial advice from an expert. I'm not allowed to offer you advice, but I would encourage you to think as a startup, as a pure startup. Don't think about loans. Think about equity, because that's where money comes from at that early stage. If you're scaling, If you're looking for sustainable growth and increasing the number of products or services that you have to take to market, then an innovation loan may be perfectly suitable for you. That doesn't mean to say we will say no to pre-revenue businesses. We will look carefully from a credit point of view as to whether it's suitable, but we want you, first of all, to look carefully at your own business. Talk to your board, talk to your shareholders, get expert financial advice, and consider whether a long-term financial commitment is suitable for you. We also want businesses that are credit constrained. I'm probably not allowed to put a terminology like that in there because it's not in 8-year-old speak. We want businesses that are struggling to attract finance. We want to take risks. We're not seeking to compete with the established financial markets. I don't want to compete with angel investors or VCs or commercial lenders or equipment financiers. If you can go and get money from them, fantastic, please do so. Let's use the taxpayers' funding that's coming through Innovate UK to stimulate people who are too risky for those people, but who nevertheless are doing something sensible and for whom a loan with our risk appetite would work. It has to be about later stage R&D, specifically experimental development, and we want to see that clear route to commercial success. And we'd like to see that actually as part of your project, and I'll talk about that in a sec. And we want to take risk. We're very, very happy to take innovation and technology risk because we believe we can understand that. We use independent external assessors to look at every application, 5 of them on each one, so we can assume that innovation risk. We're prepared to take some credit risk. We probably have a crazy credit appetite. We're not prepared to take operational risk. Fraud, things like that don't fit well with managing public money and our responsibilities of managing that public money. For the projects that we want to fund, as I've said, we can provide between £100,000 and £1 million of debt finance to cover the eligible project costs of your later stage R&D project. The interest rate that we're offering is remarkably low, 3.7%, and that's fixed for the life of the loan. That rate is, just so you're aware, that's the Treasury discount rate for financial transactions and is effectively, therefore, Innovate UK's cost of funding. So we're passing that on to you rather than doing it interest-free. And maybe in the future we might think about doing a slightly higher rate of interest, maybe to encourage you to repay early when you get to be really healthy. But for this pilot programme, it's fixed at 3.7%. We will ask for reasonable collateral. Not because we necessarily place a huge amount of value on it, but because we think it's important in our position as a sensible lender. So this is not an unsecured loan. We will ask for some security. We won't ask for directors' guarantees. Personal guarantees from directors, we know from talking to a lot of SMEs, you hate. And it's a very, very, very common reason for businesses not to go out and seek funding in the debt markets. So we're not looking for personal guarantees from directors or shareholders. Equally, we're not unsecured. We will be looking to take probably a fixed and floating charge, a debenture over the overall assets of your business, so that if things go horribly wrong, we're not in a position where taxpayers' money is put even more at risk. We will also look to take specific security over assets that you purchase with the proceeds of the loan and IP that you develop with the proceeds of the loan. We expect to be a senior subordinated lender, so if you have today or in the future commercial debt that's there already in your business or that comes into your business and it needs to be senior secured debt, we would be prepared to allow them to have priority and for us to be a second ranking lender. We would expect to be ahead of junior debt, and by junior debt I mean things like directors' loans, shareholders' loans, convertible loan notes. Many a VC or angel investor will invest in a company and structure it as part equity, probably part preference shares, and part convertible debt. We think that all has upside potential and that is risk-bearing and is really equity, and therefore we would expect that to be junior and behind us if things go horribly wrong when a workout happens or whatever. We will also ask for covenants. And by that, what I mean is we will ask you to make promises to us. You will promise to allow a monitoring officer to come in once a quarter and make sure that your project is on track and look at the numbers of what you spent the money on and what you're planning to spend the money on, because we think that's a really good way of helping to make sure that your project is de-risked even more than you're doing yourselves. We will ask for covenants around you providing us with financial information. So every quarter you will be required to provide us with financial information so that our credit specialists can look and make sure that your business isn't in a really, really deep hole. And we will have a term in the loan agreement that says if you're in a really, really deep hole, if you've breached those covenants or if something is going horribly wrong in the project, we might be required to say, actually, let's stop. We're not going to lend you anymore. We're going to stop drawdowns. And it's better to get out of that hole, get back on track, and then let's carry on. Or if that hole is so deep, don't dig it any deeper because things are going horribly wrong. So let's stop, let's accelerate the loan. And if things need to go into recoveries or administration, liquidation, all those horrid things, let's get that out of the way straight away rather than making it even more painful, because we do want to be a responsible lender. And we'll have other covenants around maintaining certain ratios, the amount of cash in your business, your asset position, your leverage ratios, the sort of things that you might expect to see in a reasonably standard loan agreement. And covenants around things like changing control. So if you've got a group of shareholders who decide after a few years to sell the business because it's all going very, very well, and the new buyer of the business is, I don't know, a whopping great corporate like GE, where I used to work, then that's not the sort of person that this loan scheme is designed for. So we wouldn't stop you from selling your business to GE, but we would have to say, before you do that, or as you do that, you have to repay the loan, and then off you go and enjoy being part of a whopping great corporate. So we believe that those are sensible, proportionate, reasonable terms and conditions, and we hope that you'll agree with that too. In the competition guidance, and indeed summarised in this slide deck when you get it after this event, are the heads of terms, a term sheet that goes into these things in slightly more detail, and I would absolutely encourage you to, if you're considering doing this, to look at those with someone who understands the ins and outs of a loan agreement. I think they're really good fun, but many a technologist perhaps doesn't. So talk to somebody who, like me, enjoys the ins and outs of a nice loan agreement. Here's a quick slide to just sort of summarize what we found when we were first roadshowing these innovation loans and talking to the businesses and deciding whether or not we should do these and making the case to BEIS and to Treasury and to ministers that we should. So some things, sort of an is not or are not slide. So as I've said, we're not replacing grants. These are complementary to grants. It's for a later stage R&D project and for a new project. You cannot use an innovation loan to provide the match funding for an R&D grant that you might be getting from Innovate UK. Two reasons for that. One, it would be contravening state aid regulations by having two forms of state aid for the same project, which is not allowed. And there's an issue around R&D tax relief, as with other state-aided activities there that you need to think about. And the other is because we want you to do new things. This is a pilot program. We have £50 million. We're aiming to run certainly 4 competitions, and this is the 4th, probably a 5th, starting in September. So £50 million over a couple of years. It's not being run in the same way as our core competitions or through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. It's not free money. I need to let that one sink in, because people are used to Innovate UK offering free money in the form of grants. This is not free money. This is a loan to your business. You will have to repay it, even if your project is horribly unsuccessful. We'll be disappointed, you'll be clearly even more disappointed, but you will still be required to repay your loan. So it's not contingent repayment. It's not success-based, and if things happen to be nice and you're feeling generous and charitable, you repay. No, this is a loan to your business and is repayable. The terms are beneficial. We believe that interest rate of 3.7% fixed over 10 years is far lower than the market would charge. We think the market for something like this, the sort of businesses we're seeing is, 10, 12% per annum, plus arrangement fees, plus quarterly monitoring fees, plus all sorts of break fees, plus probably some equity upside, some options, warrants, kickers, and whatever. We're a lot cheaper than that. And as a result, this is a form of state aid, because we're offering aid to you in that difference. And the state aid, and there's some slides in the deck if you really want to go into the detail, is basically the difference between the market rate of interest and what we're charging, plus and the absence of fees. And that differential over the life of the loan, when discounted back to today's value, is the equivalent of a grant. And that grant equivalent needs to be below the intensity rate that's permitted in state aid for research and development through Innovate UK's notified state aid scheme, which basically means below 45% as a proportion of the project costs in that benefit over the life of the loan, and 35% for medium-sized businesses. The loan structure I'm going to talk about in a second, but it's basically in three parts: an availability period, an extension period, and a repayment period. It could be as long as 10 years. It's not an overdraft facility, it's not a working capital facility, it's not a revolving credit facility. You can't borrow, repay, redraw, all fancy things like that. It's a term loan, it's a facility. Specifically, it's an innovation loan for your R&D project. I've talked about collateral, which we think is reasonable. It's not unsecured, but equally we're not talking about personal guarantees. It's just for single SMEs. So it's not for sole traders, it's not for individuals. That keeps us out of the Consumer Credit Act, where we'd rather not be. Technically, we're not authorised, but the business loans that we're making to businesses of your nature isn't an activity that requires authorisation, so we've chosen not to go down that route. But it's for single businesses, SMEs. So it's not for sole traders, it's not for large companies. They can go into the market and borrow anyway. It's not for universities, they've got their own weird and wonderful way of funding themselves. It's not for collaborations, it's not for a consortium. I can't lend to a consortium because it's not a single legal entity, it's a group of people who've contractually agreed amongst themselves to work together around doing something for a particular objective. If you want to work with other people, that's fine, but they would have to be subcontractors. They would not be recipients of the loan, they would not be obliged to repay, your business would be. So it's done in that way. It's competitive, it's for the most innovative and suitable projects, and it's done on a batch basis using the Innovate UK competition infrastructure. So I'm afraid it's not always open. The timing therefore may not be perfect for you. That's our problem, or that's our fault and your problem, but we hope that you'll manage with that. It's not for any purpose, it has to be for that R&D project, and it's not for the easy stuff. We want really risky, really cutting-edge innovations, because that's where taxpayers' money makes a difference. And it's not for those who should or could or can borrow commercially already. If you don't demonstrate to us that you need public sector funding, then we won't offer it to you. If we look at it, and people like Kat and colleagues in her team, we've been around, we've seen a few bankable and unbankable propositions, and if we look at something and say, that's perfectly bankable, then we will be in a position where we might need to say, sorry, no, you're too good. You're too creditworthy. So it's for SMEs that can demonstrate a real need for public support. The way the customer journey works, so to speak, is that we've done the market testing, we've done roadshows, we've launched this pilot program. Each of our competitions has a defined opening and closing date. This is the fourth competition that we're running in this pilot program. We did one around infrastructure systems and specifically first-of-a-kind demonstrator projects. Then we did one around manufacturing and materials, particularly around manufacturing readiness. We've run an open competition which closed just recently, and we're just working through, actually we've got a progress panel on that one to see who's going to go forward in the next day or so. This is the fourth competition, the second one that's open in scope. And then, as I said, we may well run a fifth competition, but we can't guarantee that we will, because we're quite motivated to get money out the door, to be entirely honest with you. We want to be able to demonstrate to Treasury, to BEIS, to ministers, that there is such demand for this that they should unlock not just the £50 million that they've given us for the pilot programme, but maybe go back to what the Chancellor first said in 2015, which was more along the lines of £165 million a year from 2020 onwards. We're quite keen to demonstrate through the interim evaluation that we're doing with independent consultants that this is a really good thing to do. So we may be motivated to get so much money out of the door so quickly that we don't have enough left for a 5th competition. I don't think that's likely, but until it's announced, please don't believe that it will be there. Once you've applied, you apply and there's 2 parts to your application. There's part A, is this a really cool project? And part B, are you a suitable business to want to take on an innovation loan, that can take on an innovation loan, and that we believe would be suitable to lend to? If both of those conditions are met, then we will make a loan offer. That loan offer would come after we've done detailed credit analysis, so it won't just be what's in your application, parts A and particularly the part B around the business financials. We will have additional questions to ask around those financials. And we may make you a loan offer after a management presentation that says you've asked for, I don't know, £500,000 over 10 years. We might say, here's £450,000 over 7 years. Would that work for you? Or it might be, in the case, one case we've had already was somebody said, this is £1 million project, we'd like to borrow £500,000, we'll put the other £500,000 in ourselves, and it's a project that, and the total length of the loan will be 7 years, I think it was. In that case, we said to them, actually, why don't you put in £400,000 of your own money? You can borrow £600,000 from us. If you agree that that makes sense and we think the numbers work, then that £100,000 that you're not putting in to cover those project costs yourself, you can spend on something that you really, really need, which is support for that marketing and salesperson, because it was clear in the management presentation that the marketing leader was really, really good, but was significantly under-resourced. And that happened to work, and the company agreed, so we ended up lending a little bit more than they had asked for, because they believed that it all made sense and that the numbers stacked up. So they'll be going through the terms and conditions, the loan documentation, the fun bit for people like me that like page turn of loan documentations and can say no when people ask for unreasonable things, and yeah, fair enough. We want to keep the loan agreement as reasonably standard as possible. We know that there will be a couple of clauses where people will inevitably need to have a little bit of wiggle room. Then after that, there will be conditions to meet. So in the first competition that we ran around infrastructure systems, we've made 13 offers of loans, and I think 8 or 9 of those businesses are already drawing down on their loans. One's just wrapping up the final terms and conditions of the loan agreement. I was on holiday, I missed the page turn of the loan agreement, which I was really disappointed about, but apparently it was great fun. Then there are certainly 3 others where one of the significant conditions that we placed in the loan offer was you need to raise more capital. And in fact, they agreed they need to raise more capital. So until that has happened, and there's a drop-dead date by when it must happen, once they've raised that additional capital, then at the same time our loan can start drawing down. So there may be some significant conditions. Other conditions might be conditions subsequent rather than conditions precedent, so things that happen after rather than before the first drawdown. We made one loan offer where a condition subsequent was you really need within 6 months to get a significantly better adequate financial control resource within your business. And in fact, we'll give you 6 months to do that, and if you don't, then we'll hesitate about the next drawdown. But actually, we really, really think you ought to do that within the next 6 weeks, because you are underpowered financially, and it's holding back your business. So come on, guys, get the finance person in place, because they really need it. Then you get to the loan period, and the loan is structured around your project. In a grant-funded project, you would incur the cost. You would then reclaim it if it's an eligible project cost, or a proportion of that at the end of the next quarter, and around costs that you have incurred and defrayed in the previous quarter. With an innovation loan, what we want to do is to be able to provide you with funding at the start of the quarter, so that you have the cash available, you can spend it on your project activity, maybe put in money of your own if that's what you've agreed to do, and then have a reconciliation, have a discussion with the monitoring officer, show that it's all tickety-boo. And sorry, that's from Ian's slide later. He's got a slide with tickety-boo on, I'm so jealous. And then draw down for the next coming quarter. So you're drawing down quarterly in advance. You're paying interest at the end of each quarter on the amount that's outstanding at that point in time. So you have to recognise that there will be interest payable right from the start of this facility. And that's important for you to look at when it comes to thinking about affordability, suitability for you as a business. That drawdown period, that availability period, the first part of your project, when you're doing that later stage R&D, the clever techie stuff that I don't understand, that could last up to 3 years. And it's up to you to say, this is the appropriate length for our project. And our assessors will look at that and they'll have a view on it. After that availability period, then no further funds can be drawn down. But because we know that even after you've completed your R&D activity, it still takes time to be a commercial success around this new product or service that you're introducing. We know this from previous evaluations of the SMART program that we used to run, that's now morphed into the open program. We know that it can take up to 2 years to prove the commercial model, to use pre-commercial contracting activity to get users, to show that the business model works as well. So we offer you a period that's still part of your project, if you choose, that's an extension period. And in that period, whilst you wouldn't be drawing down any further funding from our loan, you'd be putting your own money in, because it's probably sales and marketing activity by then, which isn't an eligible project cost. In that period, you would not be required to make repayments yet. So it would be an interest-only period. You would pay interest at the end of each quarter on the amount that was outstanding under your loan, but not yet having to make repayments. And then at the end of that extension period, once you're fully commercial, you're in the market, hopefully a roaring success, you then have a period of up to 5 years when you would make repayments. Those would be quarterly, the same amount each quarter of principal and interest on a steady level balance, declining balance, not a reducing, but level payments every quarter, whatever that's called. And by the end of it, you would be nice and fully repaid. So it could be as long as 10 years, 3 years availability, 2 years extension, 5 years repayment. As I've said, typically that would be an exception, a 10-year facility. We think 7 years, maybe 5 years is more suitable in most cases. And hopefully at the end, there's that final repayment. And everybody's really, really happy, and you're hugely successful, and you've made a ton of money. Won't always work that way. We're going to take risk. We will have problems occurring in our portfolio. Some of the businesses that we lend to will encounter difficulties, will fall over, and at that point we will be a responsible lender, but we will also take into account the fact that we're managing public money. We won't just go, whatever, that wouldn't be right, or as my daughter says, meh. She's obviously young. We would be responsible at that point, and we, if necessary, would appoint collection agents, go through a recovery process. Hopefully it won't come to that for everybody. It will happen to a few, though. Just quickly, because I'm running out of time, this is the application process, which hopefully I've described. You register, you get Part A of the application by email, you go onto an FTP site, you download the project finance form, Part B, and the business financial spreadsheet. You complete all the stuff, you get good advice, you take into account the tips that Ian and the KTN gives you, and you submit by the deadline. So register by the 29th of August at 12 noon, submit by the 5th of September at 12 noon, no later. You'll do it in the last 5 minutes. We know you do, we've got the data that proves it. Please don't get wrapped up in computer snafus, but you'll do it anyway, so there's no point in me saying. We'll then look at scope and eligibility, which basically means we kick out those that didn't even complete all the forms. In the last competition, we had 95 applications. 20 of them, actually more than 20, didn't do all the parts of the forms. They wasted their time. They were ineligible and were kicked out. Innovation assessment through our assessors, Part A. Credit evaluation initially, Part B, to see whether it's not unsuitable and not just wildly implausible, and those that are both innovative and not unsuitable then go through for detailed credit analysis and maybe a loan offer, and then off we go. This is an open competition, so the scope is basically no holds barred. It's got to be later stage R&D. We prefer that you carry out your activity in the UK, but you don't have to. It would be illegal for us to say that you can't, but justify what you're doing, why you're doing it. Any industry, any sector, from healthcare to virtual reality, from blockchain through to digital manufacturing, and everything in between and around and beyond those sorts of things, it's an open competition from a scope point of view. But we want you to be highly innovative. The scope of this is about game-changing, disruptive, cutting-edge innovation. Really cool stuff. And it has to be about experimental development. I promised you a boring slide. Here's a boring slide. Please take a read. This is the European Commission's definition of experimental development from the General Block Exemption Regulations. If you like GBA, have a read of it. It's great fun. Most people don't, so have a read of this, please. What this means is we want you to be doing things that are particularly focused around things like prototyping, demonstrating, piloting, testing, user-facing trials, showing that you can have, that there is a viable business model there. It doesn't include routine stuff. No. No, it says it may include the development of a commercially usable prototype, which is necessarily the final product. So you don't have to do something which is the final commercial product, but if you do make something that is actually then sold, that's okay. Previously, in Innovate UK grant-funded competitions, that clause wasn't included in our definition, which meant that if you did all this work and your piece of kit that you were creating and selling ended up being you were working on it in your R&D program and you then sold it, you'd have to repay the grant with the proceeds of that sale because it was considered commercial activity, even though you'd spent 2 years of R&D to come up with your really, really, really super clever techie thing. What we're saying is, that's okay, go ahead and do that, because you're going to be repaying anyway. And we really want you to commercialize. So don't be frightened of that.
Nigel?
The one thing that it doesn't do, what we won't cover is process improvement, the usual stuff. I love process improvement, but it's not innovation. And having said that, I'm already a minute late, but let's have some Q&A. I believe Kat has some Q&A from the moderation and questions in the room. Because we're on a webinar, please wait until the microphone reaches you before you ask the question. And if you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be really helpful as well. So there was a question, Kat, you were... No, I don't think so. No. But thanks. Q&A. Who've we got? Just the question down here.
Gerard, Greg Smith from GGS Associates. A question about the ROI, which you mentioned in one of the early slides. £7. The return on investment, ROI. Yep. Which you mentioned in the early slide, being £7.30 for every. Question is, do you know how that is? How you like to calculate that?
How the GVA increase is calculated.
I think you called it ROI, as in return on investment.
I deliberately didn't use the term ROI, but whatever. So the ROI, that increase in gross value add, the return of up to £7.30 for every pound of investment.
Yeah.
That is calculated according to Her Majesty's Treasury's Magenta book. By our economics and performance team in conjunction with external evaluation consultants. Talk to Dan Hodges, read Dan's blogs on Innovate UK's website, they're really cool. He understands how that's all done, I'm afraid I don't.
Okay. And the other point was about, you've talked about how this is really for experimental development.
Yes.
And then you made a comment about sometimes you will accept pre-revenue companies, which kind of implies that most of them are going to be revenue-producing companies.
They may well be. I would probably from a credit point of view, be more comfortable with a business that is generating revenues that's on, I don't know, product number 7, and they need to get into products numbers 8 and 9. From a credit point of view, that's much easier for us to look at than where there's a binary credit risk around, and either it happens or it doesn't. And if you haven't got any revenues, then how are you going to pay interest at the end of the first quarter? We will need to look at that. Kat will talk more about that later on, about our approach to credit. Thank you.
Hi, Prakash Kumar from Air Hydrotech Limited. My first question is, how does the director's personal credit rating affect this process?
Kat will come to that later on. We're lending to the business. We're interested in the management team, but we're not lending to those directors, and therefore it will indirectly impact on it, not directly.
And my second question is, how do you compare the benefits of getting a loan from Innovate UK with British Business Bank?
The British Business Bank is there to address issues around the supply of finance to small businesses in the UK. They work through partner organisations. They have things like the Enterprise Finance Guarantee, which is a guarantee scheme that helps businesses, helps lenders to accept a little more risk than they might otherwise do, and therefore do a bit more of what they ordinarily do. They have programmes like Help to Grow, which encourage lenders to take on a bit more credit risk. Not sure how much of that's getting done, to be honest. They provide capital to venture capital funds, to angel syndicates. Therefore, and their role is to, it's a form of state aid, but they're not focused on innovation. We're focused on innovation. We're funding innovation projects, so they're different.
Thank you.
Thanks. The lady at the back in black. I'm supposed to take a question from a lady first, because then more women will ask questions and it won't be us men all the time. But there we go. We nearly got you first, but there you go. Thank you.
You mentioned that that sales and marketing is not an eligible project cost, but
Correct.
You've also stated that you're interested in later stage startups that are interested in growth. I'm just wondering, really there's a strong connection with marketing and growth. So is there any sort of, I don't know, is there a bit more information you can perhaps provide? Because obviously there's a lot of insights and data analysis that comes from marketing activities that inform growth.
I would suggest that, please read the guidance for applicants. That's where the official rules are. The making sales and marketing activity not an eligible project cost comes from the state aid requirements. Because state aid shouldn't be for commercial activities. It should be for research and development and innovation activities. If, as part of your project, you need to understand the market and your customers, then include that as part of the project activity, justify it, and include it in your application. And hopefully our assessors, as you'll see when Ian's talking about the application part A, they'll think, oh, that's a really, really good use of that time and team. Okay. So hopefully it will work that way.
Thank you.
Thanks. The chap in front with the beard.
Sebastian Andras from HAL Robotics. I'm curious about the term new project. Yep. If we've already begun development of a project, a product, is that immediately ineligible if it's not covered by any other grants or anything like that?
No, it wouldn't make it ineligible. I think you would need to demonstrate clearly in your application what you've done already, what you haven't done. And when I say new project, again, because of state aid, we're only allowed to provide funding for research and development projects. So it's for you to define and articulate and characterize that project. What we don't want to do is provide funding for an existing, particularly an existing grant-funded project, because that would then end up being two forms of state aid for the same thing, which we're not allowed to do.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. How are we doing online? Do we have questions there? Am I ignoring people? No? Okay, let's carry on quickly.
I've got the microphone.
Yeah.
Just wondering, I work for Highview Power. It's a energy storage. We're trying to develop our energy storage technology. We have a demonstration plant, but to go commercial, we have to fund feed, front-end engineering, design, and I was wondering if these loans can be used for funding that's scaling up design engineering.
If you can show that that's properly within that definition of experimental development, that it's highly innovative, then yeah, it's certainly something we could look at. There's perhaps something we should talk about maybe in the lunch break to get into a bit more detail. But on the face of it, it would be about how well you articulate that and how well you put that forward in your application to show that it's right.
Right, okay, thanks.
So there, and then the lady in the pale, and then over there.
Hello, Paul Stockwell from Process Vision. Pilot plants and customer case studies, if you like. We're in an industry where everybody says that's great, who else is using it? And if they're the first, it's usually a quite short conversation. So we need to build case studies and use pilot plants and stuff like that. Would that be included?
Yes. I think in that definition of experimental development, piloting is specifically included there. Thanks. So the lady in the pale top over there.
Hi, Shruti Kharbanda from Devumi. You mentioned earlier that pre-revenue companies would struggle to get the loan.
They may.
They may.
They may make it more difficult for us easily to form a credit opinion that's positive.
Absolutely. So the question is, what kind of things would you look into them to say that they might qualify for the loan?
Adequacy of capitalisation, future cash flows, and Kat's going to talk more about that after the break. And then I think there was a gentleman over there, and then I saw Joe's hand up at the back.
Hi, Michael Kemp, Sticky World. Two very quick questions. First one is, the loan compared to a grant, are you drawing down as you need it, or after you've...
Quarterly in advance.
Quarterly in advance, great. So that is the difference. Second one, which I guess I can't quite get my head around the whole concept. If this is about scale-up, then the type of focus of activities of the companies in scale-up is around market, sales, customers.
That may be one of their activities. Yeah.
And it obviously would change on different innovation type businesses, but so a focus on development at that time when you've really got to be getting out to the market with your technology, with your innovation, it kind of feels sort of they're competing against each other. So it really comes down to the definition of experimental development. If I was to go for this, I would probably be looking to invest in the market activity with the largest companies in the world and establishing pilot trials of our technology that we've been busy building for the last few years. And the risk for us would be, are we convinced enough from the evidence we've got to invest this money to go after those businesses, knowing there still is a risk that you can go to the market and there's new things that you learn about the bigger companies that take you longer. So the loan is really a bridging loan to... Okay, maybe I won't give it. But the loan from a business is actually filling a gap, because we have been to the loan market.
It may well be filling a gap, but it's specifically not a bridge loan.
Sure, okay, but
Sorry,
it's
technical here.
No, you're right. I take that back. But it's. I'm trying to understand: is this actually a good product for a company that's been innovation focused, has revenues, now recognises they need to go to the market and invest in development of bigger pilots?
I'm going to answer really quickly and then defer it and say, let's ask the panel their opinion. Okay. So my view would be, if the business need is for explosive growth that's particularly sales and marketing oriented rather than R&D oriented, get some equity and get a big ton of it and grow the heck out of things as quickly as you can so that you get early mover advantage, if not first mover advantage. If you're doing that, and you're also thinking, and the next thing is going to be this, so that in a year's time when I'm really successful here, and I don't want to wait 6 months or a year for the next thing to come along, and I need to do some R&D, but I'm putting all my existing resources and I'm raising a ton of equity to do this, maybe consider borrowing some money to do the next thing as well. And that's what we mean by stimulating and encouraging innovation and encouraging growth through innovation. Because if it can offer you some additional cash on the appropriate terms that gets you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do, or to do them more quickly, then maybe a loan works. But let's see what the panel think when we get there, because I'm eating into their time quite significantly. So last question, if we may, Joe at the back.
Mine was actually to do with the, Joe Eckersley from Bubble. Mine was to do with the pre-revenue position as well for startups, and I know that you're going to cover that with Kat in a little while. It was specifically, we're tipping into the very, very early low levels of commercial trial revenue. Is that, and we have investment, does that improve the position that a startup would be viewed in?
Absolutely,
okay.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes. Right, I have gone on for a quarter of an hour longer than I should have done. I apologise. So let's get some more interesting people up on the stage. So Ian, Diana, Sean, is Nick here? I haven't seen. Oh, and Nick. If you'd like to come up onto the stage, we're going to talk about sort of where money comes from. And maybe a good starting point, after you've briefly introduced yourselves, would be to talk about that question. From practicality's point of view, it's always good when you see panel members introducing themselves to one another on the stage. It shows I've really managed this well. Ian and Diana have lapel mics. I'm afraid Sean and Nick, you're going to have to fight it out between you with a handheld, but you have to use that mic because otherwise the people on the webinar won't get it. So could you briefly each introduce yourselves so that people know who you are, where you're from, and maybe hazard a guess as to why I might have invited you onto this panel.
Thank you, Nigel. So starting from this end of the row, I'm Ian Tracey from the Knowledge Transfer Network. I head up the team called Access to Funding and Finance, and the remit of the team is how do we get money into early stage groundbreaking ideas, using money not just from Innovate UK, but other grant givers, the financial markets in terms of angels and other investors, and other commercial lending products.
Hi everyone, my name is Diana. I am an Enterprise Europe Network advisor from UCL Innovation and Enterprise, it's a mouthful, which is the innovation and commercialisation arm of University College London. To put it into a wider context, the Enterprise Europe Network project is funded by the European Commission and also by Innovate UK. In the UK there are 21 delivery partners, UCL is one of them, and I know that Nick will give you another introduction about Enterprise Europe Network. So in the UCL we work exclusively with London-based SMEs, and this includes student startups and UCL affiliated spin-out companies. So we help them mainly to launch internationally via the network. So we help them with anything from funding to intellectual property and anything related with European EU-related laws and regulations. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sean Beeney, and I work for the Institute of Chartered Accountants, where I specialise in innovation, investment, early stage funding, venture capital, scale-ups, those kind of things. And that includes talking to government about encouraging more support and more investment, public and private investment with government help, and also talking to our 150,000 members in business, investment and advisory about how they can utilise these kind of funds. So we do a lot of work with variously the British Business Bank, with Innovate UK, and with organisations like the Enterprise Europe Network.
Hi, I'm Nick Thompson. I work for Newable. We run a couple of projects, one of which is the one that I work in, which is Innovate to Succeed, which is half funded by Innovate UK and half by the European Regional Development Fund. We also have an EEN section, which does very much what Diana has said, which we've got a couple of our representatives here today. Put your hands up, guys, please. You can go and grab those guys later. I've been working in the I2S project for about 14 months now. We deliver SME advice to companies that come to us. It's fully funded. and we work in a number of areas, including access to finance and funding, intellectual property, and sort of organisational development, just to name a few.
Okay, thank you. So if I can paraphrase and adapt the earlier question that we had there, which is, if I can paraphrase it as to what sort of money might a business use for scaling through sales and marketing activity, or for research and development activity, or for getting started, where might those sorts of money come from, and when might they be most suitable and appropriate, so that we can put innovation loans into some sort of context? And I guess I'd be interested in each of your opinions on that, because I think you all see that dilemma when you're talking to businesses that are really growth oriented.
Shall I go?
You've got one.
Yeah, I'll go. So, holding the baton. So, seeing these sort of the scale up processes every day, there are a number of funding options, but a lot of them have strings attached to them, and all of them have strings attached to them, and it's the ability to put up with what strings you have attached, which seems to be the thing that denotes which route to go to funding. Nigel, you said earlier about you offered 100,000 more to a company so they could use their own 100,000 for the support in the marketing thing, and I think that's something that was a little bit lost on the room, but the finding ways to get into that marketing and promotion sector without using public money is very difficult. There's equity, there's loan, but there's also sort of some small, sharp things like crowdfunding and bridging loans, as we've said before. All of them have their merits, but again, it's not wishing to sound too dire, but it's the lesser of the evils. What can you put up with as your penance?
Yeah, but I think you're ignoring the whole. You're also forgetting the value of profitable sales, haven't you? I mean, another good source of funding which isn't used is reaching out to prospective customers and seeing if they're prepared to pay for it, either through pre-purchasing of product or through helping to develop it because you're tweaking it for them. It means that they get a better say in what they want. And also, it's probably great that you've got a product that you've got at least one person to buy, ignoring all the other issues. So for me, if you can get profitable sales, or failing that, a customer to take you through the journey because they get what you're about. I have seen one tech company, I don't want to mention them because it's a bittersweet story, who managed to use up all their investment money. And you could tell they had a good product, because when it was getting close to, we might have to go under here, it was the customers who turned around and said, we realise now we need you so much, so we're going to pay for the first batch, and we trust it's going to turn up because we're sunk if it doesn't. And that's why I feel customers, for me, are the best source of finance you can get your hands on with the least strings.
The sort of the flip side of that, really, though, is that not all of the companies that we see are at a stage where they've got a customer base.
Completely true.
So that does narrow the point. But I've had a couple of clients who've used the Kickstarter system and pre-sales on tech items, and that goes down very well, because I think it's the doing a bit of training to be able to communicate what you're going to give and what the benefits are before it actually becomes a real thing is a great skill.
And it's that guiding of the product set which your Kickstarter gives you. So
Absolutely.
Sean, I know you're ready to jump in.
No, I actually agree with both of you, and I agree with you, Ian. I think that always the strongest position is that you're starting to generate revenues which you can reinvest in the business. And there are many very good examples, often involving Innovate UK and the KTN, where people have done that with larger corporate partners and research organizations and those kind of things. I think for those who are then moving to the next stage of scaling up and starting to look for equity investment, I think there's good news and bad news. And the good news is there is a much greater variety of types of equity investment and types of investor than there was 10 years ago, and certainly than there was 20 years ago, we produce a free guide called the Business Finance Guide with the British Business Bank and Innovate UK and the KTN and others. And that Business Finance Guide lists at least 30 different kinds of finance and places you can then go and find those investors. To give you an example of that variety, this year alone, I've counted 12 new UK-based, mainly London-based, but UK-based equity funds for early stage and scale-up companies, albeit that those 12 funds are also investing across Europe and in some cases, for example, in Israel. But that's new money worth £2.15 billion just coming in this year looking for equity investment. And the run rate of venture capital investment, more sophisticated angel investment, and sometimes there is sophisticated crowdfunding investment as well, although I'd always be very cautious about that market. I think if you look at the run rate, it's something like £5 billion a year is now being invested. I mean, that gives you that sense that there are a lot of opportunities out there. There are people looking for investment. I think the difficult side is it's not cheap, it's not easy, and almost as the market has become bigger in terms of UK equity investment, it's become more demanding in terms of what it would look for from you. And I think also that you have to be very selective and do your own due diligence in terms of the kind of potential investors that you're looking at.
But I'm agreeing with you, and I think, but the point is, the money is increasing, but I think the need of people to find the route to that money is they shouldn't expect an email via a website to result in a meeting. It's back to pressing the flesh, warm introductions, and when you go on that journey, that the materials you're taking through are sensible, good quality, and compelling to the investor for them to join in the journey. And I think the challenge is educating startups and scale-up companies that the part they play, and it's a more proactive role than they might have been expecting.
And Diana, I know you've worked with accountancy firms, with tax advisors. We were on actually with Sean and as well at the Royal Academy of Engineering recently, where we were talking about different sources of finance for innovation, including, for example, R&D tax credits, as well as grants, as well as European grant funding. How should people think about those different alternatives, and what's the best way for them to find out about them?
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I was sitting here, and because being the least experienced, I was trying hard what I can bring to the panel, but because we're heavily involved with the Enterprise Europe network from a European level, there is another product called SME Instrument. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a European funding program under the wider Horizon 2020 umbrella, I believe. And the program comes into two phases. So phase one is more like a feasibility study. So at the end of the phase one funding, you come out with a feasibility report. And phase two is more like, to me, you can call it scale up or commercialization ready. It's a big lump sum of money, up to 2.5 million, and the project will last up to 2 to 3 years, I believe. The drawback of this is because it's a European level, so you'll be competing with all the European SMEs. So unfortunately, the success rate is very, very, very low, and they're looking for companies that are highly disruptive, commercial potential. And back to the R&D tax credit, because I used to work as an R&D consultant. I used to assess companies' eligibility for R&D tax credit, not from the financial side. I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm going to stay away from the financial side. But it's a UK government scheme trying to encourage companies to do more R&D, and R&D might be. It's not what you think it might be. It's not always just a lab coat, people wearing lab coats. It could be anything, as long as you fit into the HMRC's definition of R&D. So I'm quite happy to have a chat with you off stage in terms of what qualifies as R&D. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, because I went over time, we're having to compress this panel. I really apologise about that, but please do grab them in the break. Is there one compelling question from somebody either on the webinar or in the room that needs to be asked from this panel of experts? I'll go for the lady at the back. Sorry, sir.
So you've discussed a lot of different routes in. I think I personally sit here and think, wow, there's so many different touch points. How do I find out the best way to apply? Is it simply just going through every single application, or do you suggest other ways of kind of getting in front of the right people in the most efficient way possible?
So I think the first thing that pops into my head is this is where you should be using your mentors, your non-exec directors, to learn from people who've been through that journey. In the absence of finding somebody that you know who's been through that journey, who you can trust, there's plenty of people like the Catapults, EEN, KTN, the Finance Guide, Google searching, that can provide that guidance. But I would urge somebody that you know, a good quality NED would be my starter for 10.
Okay, so use your networks, read the Business Finance Guide, think about different sources of finance from R&D tax credits, equity, debt, grant funding from Europe, from the UK. There may be, particularly outside of London, there are perhaps regional, local, subnational or national grants and other forms of finance, particularly in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, out in the east of England, etc. Think about all those things. Talk to KTN, the EEN, the Catapults, growth hubs, professional experts, so members of the Institute of Accountants, etc. And think long and hard about the right way to do things so that you can make the right decision. And what I suppose the one takeaway I'd like everybody to think is that very often when we're up here as Innovate UK, promoting a new competition, we're always focused in on the grant, the project, the technology. And we really want you to demonstrate in that application your technology strategy. And we used to be called the Technology Strategy Board. I also want you and implore you to consider your commercialisation strategy, your go-to-market strategy, proving product market fit. And we want innovation loans to help you get towards that. And above all, I want you to think about your funding strategy. Where's the money going to come from to enable you to deliver on your technology strategy and achieve your go-to-market strategy and do it all in such a way that your business is really going to grow? So with that sermon over, I'd like to thank the panel very much indeed for a short but sweet but very, very useful interjection in this event. We're now going to break for 15 minutes. There's coffee, tea, hopefully some cold water outside. Use the facilities, and then we'll be back in here in 15 minutes where Ian's going to go into the application of Part A in detail. Kat's going to talk about Part B and our approach to credit, and then we'll hear from a business that's receiving an innovation loan. So the folks online, please come back in 15 minutes. And the folks in the room will see you shortly. Thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed to the panel.
Okay, welcome back, folks online. Hopefully you've all found a fan or some air conditioning and had a nice glass of ice water. Folks coming back into the room, we're ready to get going again. Only 6 minutes behind time. That's bad, my fault. Apologise for that. Next off, normally, as I said earlier, we read out the instructions to you, and we go through all 10 questions in Part A of the application, and we tell you what it says. And that's fine. There are obviously some people for whom reading isn't easy, in which case contact our customer support team and we'll read it out to you if that's necessary, but that's quite a rare occurrence. For most people, such as yourselves in this room, I'm thinking that it's much more likely that you can read the instructions. I would encourage you to read the instructions, but understanding a bit more about the whys, that getting some advice on some hints, tips, some good things to do, some not so good things to do, and therefore to avoid, would be really, really useful. Therefore, Tracey from the Access to Funding, the head of the Access to Funding and Finance team at the Knowledge Transfer Network, he and his team have put together a really, really, really useful document, a guidance booklet about how to write a compelling application, and Ian has very kindly said that he's going to come along and talk us through that, so you'll get some advice on applying rather than the instructions. So I'll shut up and leave it to Ian. Thank you very much.
Nigel. Clicker. Excellent. Right. So this part of the grant application, the loan application, is strongly based on the grant application. So we're taking the similar sort of advice that we used for the grants. And the first point I'm going to put across, did you ever play that game as a child where you zigzag the paper and then you all draw part of it and then you unravel it and you see the picture that you drew around the table? Do you remember playing that game as a child? When we read grant applications and soon innovation loan applications to see them, the application forms feel a lot like that because they've passed the application form around to different people in the organisation. And you get different styles of English, and you get different uses of words, and you get different points being made that contradict each other. So one of the very first easy, simple points I want to take away is no matter how beautiful you think your drawing is by the time you've finished, to make it really stand out, give it to an artist, who will, i.e. a wordsmith in this particular case, who'll go over it and give you that certain amount of consistency that you need for it to stand out. I think you need to understand and get into the back of your mind the odds of the race that you're going to go against. If you look at the open competition, we're looking at about 5% success rate sometimes. Nigel, do you happen to know what your odds of success are on the last call? Sorry.
It's something that people are interested in.
Yes.
With innovation loans, so far in the first first two competitions, we haven't had to say no to anybody that we thought was both innovative and suitable from a lending point of view.
Okay.
In the first competition, we had 47 applications, ended up making 13 loan offers. Second competition, we had 30-ish applications. We're taking 20 through detailed credit approval, and I think we're going to make 13 to 15 loan offers. The third competition, which was open, we had 75 eligible and in-scope applications, and I think we're going to take through about 20, 25 who are innovative and most likely suitable.
But they're great odds compared to some of the grants.
Yeah, we're not having to ration at the moment.
Yeah, but that's partly because the scheme's growing, I would guess. Pure speculation. So anyway, so the importance is to make sure that you pull it together and have somebody to wordsmith it. We know that half this application is based on the grant scheme. There are plenty of people who've been through that part of the process, so you can reach out to them and get them on board in many different ways and get them to help you with half the form. The other half is more finance-centric, and there'll be different people you'll be looking out for to help you on that one. How is it judged? It's judged by, I think, 5 assessors from memory who have a stack of them to go through. I am sure these are completely diligent, professional people in their approach. Your job, our job, is to make their life as easy as possible to find the marks that they need to give you. If you make your language difficult to read, if you're burying the key points towards the bottom of an answer, there is a real possibility that they're going to miss the information they need to award the marks, and it hurts you a lot more than it hurts them. The other thing that kicks into this, which we should be coming up to next, okay, well, that next. It's an exam paper, and like all exam papers, do you remember being told at school, read the question, answer only the question? That's what you need to do here. When I look at the grant applications, the number of times I have people who seem to answer a variation of every question with, this is the most amazing thing in this sector since ever, and the question is, what are your project risks? You end up scoring 0. Nobody has the capability to go, oh, it's just amazing, the questions don't matter, so answer what's asked. There's only one point, I think, we ask you what the product is and what its innovation. You're word limited. So make those words count and use it as a story. Somebody's going to be reading question after question after question, and they're churning through quite a few of these. Nigel talked about 40-odd applications. So make sure that when they're reading yours, the brain can follow it and the story builds up. Project summary is unscored, but it still possibly is one of the most important questions. There has been a seminal piece of work that looked at university exams and the way they got results. And there's this positive bias that comes in. And what this study has picked up is that on question 1, if the examiner feels that you're likely to succeed, they put the time and effort in to read the rest of the answers. And the very fact that they're reading the rest of the answers with a little bit more diligence means they find the keywords that they need to award the marks. This is completely a hidden bias that they've discovered through research. So even though that's unmarked, this is your first opportunity to get the examiners or the assessors in Innovate UK speak on your side. So if you've got the time, what we tell people to do is you do all the application form, look at the amount of time that you spent on the whole application form, and then go back and spend a double-digit percentage of time back on the opening shot. Really craft it, give it that impact, and let's get those assessors believing in you before they get to the rest of the paper. Economic, simple, 9-word, but an educated reader. We don't need to drop down to the sun level. Okay, know where they are, let's not patronize. Why do we need this wonderful invention? What is the challenge that we're trying to overcome? Invariably, I expect this to be a problem that they're fixing in other ways currently and ineffectively. What you're doing is you're turning up and fixing this known problem in a better, smarter, easier to understand and inherently great way. Why? Because if you're the first company that's asking somebody to spend some cash, there's no budget line for that. My Apple Watch, it's a communication, you know what it is, but getting me to buy an Apple Watch the first time round was a lot harder than getting me to buy my iPhone the second time round, because I knew what the iPhone was about, which is why, coincidentally, I have a Gen 2, because I didn't believe in Gen 1 and it was a birthday present. But you see where I'm coming from. So we want to see that this problem exists and it's badly being fixed today, and you're the smart way of fixing it. And we want to know that you understand the wider context, that you've given us that background. This really isn't a me question, this is a landscaping question. For all of the questions, we've got what we would call the reference sheet, so you can see how you score and what needs to be said. I'm not going to talk you through it because it must be a small-sized print at the back of the room, and I believe the fuller version will be made available online, so each of my slides will have this scoring table. And all you do is you give your work to somebody else and say, that's a scoring table, figure out where I am on that and see where you come. And remember, you're looking for a first class. We're taking the cream. So I expect 9 and 10s to be where you need to go. This is the bit you can talk about your product and how it's going to fix the problem. The only question I want to hear how amazing is the widget. The rest of the form doesn't need to know how amazing your widget is. But we do want to see a bit of wow, and we want to see how it fits in relative to everybody else. Things like patent and IP data landscapes help to show that. We need to believe you've got freedom to operate. There is no point in making the world's best widget that you can't take to market. Kind of defeats the purpose of where we're going. This isn't academic research where knowledge is useful in and of itself. This is industrial need. There's a very relevant and apt cliche. An A-class team will make a success of a B-class product. It's very difficult for you to prove many things on that form. What is the future market of something that hasn't yet been taken to market? It's something with a massive error bar. How amazing are you based on your past successes actually is a lot easier to understand and verify. This is one of the few places on the form you can back up what you say. And you have to impress and show us that you are that A-class team. Please don't be modest, but please do make statements that are true. Because if you lose us anywhere with overstating something, it really has a massive knock-on effect. What does the market look like? We want to see trends, and we want to see references, and we want to understand that you get where you're going. Remember, this loan is towards the end of your innovation journey. Some of the earlier grants are much earlier in the technical development, and you can be a bit vague and woolly on where the market's going. Where this loan is and the need for repayment, there has to be an inherent belief that the market's there, you can characterize it, and you understand how it works. And you can play an active part when you move take the product into that place. I struggle with the word conservative. I think what they mean is realistic rather than conservative. And I'll share my thoughts, and if necessary, Nigel will correct me at an appropriate moment. I hope what it doesn't mean is 1%, because 1% is just longhand for I don't know. I think what it means is this is the market that we've identified, we can tell you what it looks like, and we can explain how we're going to take a sensible but not stupidly large percentage. So I would guess it would be low double-digit percentage would be your expectation of that market characteristic. Is that not bad enough to need correcting?
I would like to see... Sorry, again.
It's okay.
I think what we really want to understand is what's the overall size of the market and the relevant part of the market. Saying that the automotive market globally is X trillion dollars, so what?
Yes.
You're going to be making the most fantastic wing mirrors with artificial intelligence that will scream and shout if there's a dog behind you. And you need to show what the market is for that. Not that you're going to take 1% share of $1 trillion market, blah, blah, blah. So what's the real market? What's the addressable market? What's the part that you're going to serve? And how do you fit into the supply chain, the value chain, so that you're going to make a ton of money?
Yeah. Hence, not the 1%. And here we're going to say, what do we achieve by doing this product? What is the output? And how are you going to make your business bigger and better for it? And so we're going to be seeing who's going to be buying it, how much is it going to be buying it for, where are you going to end up, what's going to be the change in your turnover, how are we going to see the growth of the company. So that's what we want to see out of there. And as it says, it's got to start off with, this is where we are, and this is where we're going to be going. We now get into the softer impacts. The previous one was all about pound, shilling, pence, to use the old cliche, effects on my company. This is about how do we benefit society. Nigel talked about the book earlier on that we use to assess the return on investment, the GVA additionality for Innovate UK grants. That methodology you can get from the KTN. We've got it as a downloadable spreadsheet, and we've got a fact book that goes with it. The point that crosses my mind is Innovate UK have told us what they achieve with all their supporters on average. You can look up the number. Nigel had it on an infographic earlier on. That was the GVA additionality for all of the Innovate UK tools that they deploy. We know that the loans are late-stage, close-to-market interventions, which is why they're a loan. Was the number 5.9, Nigel, from memory? Doesn't matter, I won't pull you back on the stage. Whatever that number was in Nigel's infographic, if that's the average... 7.3. The game's getting harder as we go on. I shouldn't have asked him, should I? If it's 7.3 for all Innovate UK interventions, including the really early stuff, the late-stage stuff must be higher than 7.3 would be my guess. It's just a guess. I'm just extrapolating from an infographic that they've published and the methodology that they use to calculate it. So you've got the hard numbers on the previous slide. You've got the soft numbers, as in less rigorous argued numbers. You run it through our spreadsheet, and that'll give you an output number, which should give you some feeling. And it'll be interesting to see how it compares to the benchmark that Nigel's just described. The project management should be appropriate for the size of project that you're looking at. If you're requesting 100,000 and we think you need 50,000 to manage it, that probably isn't appropriate for the project, the money that you're requesting. So things like Gantt charts are useful. You've got the appendix. But it's more about describing work packages at the appropriate size so that we know that you've got a feel for it. We don't want to see micromanagement, but think about the chunks, think about the milestones, and then give us a feeling for the methodology that you're going to use. I don't believe there's a preferred methodology, but we want to see a methodology used. If this was a £5,000 thing, it could just be periodic phone calls to check that the project's still moving. We're not at that scale. We want something a little bit more rigorous. Risks are a tricky one. We need risk. This is a project that the public, via the government, via Innovate UK, has to intervene because the risks are too much for society and the normal interventions like banks to deal with it. So this has to exist. If it's too risky, you lose it. I can't tell you where the peak is, and I can't tell you what the right answer is. I can define the two extremes. It would be certainly an interesting conversation with people who've had successful grant applications to see the sort of risk profile they've presented there, where the project was and the amount of money they were, and then try and extrapolate that to your project, where you are and the amount of money you're requesting. Get a couple of the grant applications to set your points, your reference points, and try and fit you in there. Risks can be more than technical. They can be outside your control, like regulatory. If you're trying to take something, I'm going to stick with Nigel's artificial intelligence dog spotting rear view mirror. There could be many implications on the dangers and benefits of spotting dogs through AI and what that might mean in the driving community, and you would need to bring that through here. It might possibly be legal or illegal to control your dog away. I have no idea, but we'll plough on regardless. You can use a graph to answer this and show how risks change over the project's life. And we've got a few examples of that in our handouts, which you can get from me via the KTN if we don't send them out after this presentation, sorry. And this is why you explain we need your support. And it's a sort of, without your help, this would never have happened. And you have to explain why the other answers aren't open to you, why the commercial lending is not functional in this space. Nobody else has been there before. This is a pilot. This is a prototype. The market looks proven, but the product needs to get there, that sort of thing. You can also look at the wider benefits that stakeholders bring you. You can also say, without government support, this project will take considerably longer to get to market as we'll be using our own internal resources, and we feel competitive advantage might be lost. All this money comes from a taxpayer, and at the end of the day, many of you might have read certain red top newspapers, they tend to be quite critical, quite rightly, of government mishandling. And so we need to make sure that this represents good value for money and that it's defensible that the changes we're doing to the marketplace by supporting you on this project. You can look at the wider advantages that the return on investment tool puts out as well, which touches on things like your payroll and things like that to show how the whole country's picked up through it. Like everything, the small print's important. Check that you're in scope. There is a really good competitions helpline. You can see it on the website at Innovate UK. As Nigel indicated earlier on, they track every call coming in, and they'll make sure that they've got an audited answer back to you. And I can tell you, as somebody who receives their emails, they are very good at tracking, annoyingly so. So if you have a question, I would say push it through the competition. I've no problem with speaking to any of you. You can easily get hold of my card, don't misunderstand me. But if you go through the competitions helpline, I know they'll make sure that you'll get an answer. And if for some reason they won't get it from me, they'll escalate it automatically in the background. So I would urge you to go through the competitions helpline. You're going to get your feedback from your 5 assessors. If you're unsuccessful on an Innovate UK grant or an Innovate UK innovation loan and you decide you're reapplying in the future, you're going to have to use that feedback to decide how to change your application. Some of that feedback will be contradictory. That is just the nature of asking 5 people about something. And your skill has to be in deciding which of the feedback is sensible and which of it is somebody going, well, I don't like it, but I need to justify it. And if some of that feedback you may sensibly choose to ignore, don't get too hung up on it, but see what you can learn. There's a tendency to give about 6 or 7. That seems to be about the average. Hence me saying when you get the forms, you're aiming for a 9 if you get our help sheets. That's what you need to be thinking of. Let's summarise it. Impress them from the beginning. You want them on side. You want them believing that you're the one. They've got a few tens of these to go through. You've got the few minutes of their mind as they go through yours with the metaphorical red pen. Make them believe that you're one of the outstanding ones. Answer the question asked, not the question you hope they asked. Don't forget your appendices add a lot of value. And do that short, punchy narration all the way through, using a good editor to give you that consistency. And if in doubt, ask early. There's nothing more annoying than when people come in going, the deadline's tomorrow at noon. Any chance you can work on this? Because, I know even if I did, with all the others that come in, what time are you going to have to realistically question my feedback, implement it, and submit it for noon? The 12 noon submission is a hard 12.00 noon submission. If you miss it, including Innovate UK server being offline from 11 o'clock onwards, there is limited, if any, scope for change. Maybe they're off. I don't even think your server offline counts for much, but we take little sympathy if you fail to get it on there in time. On some grants, you can submit a draft the day before and overwrite the draft on the morning with a final copy on the grounds of, well, that's a working draft. If there's a crash on my laptop tomorrow, it beats 0. If it fails, at least I've gone through the feedback loop. So that might be an approach to consider. But don't forget that noon 00 deadline. There's support out there. These are the support methods that we saw earlier on. But don't forget the people who've done this in the past. Unfunded, non-exec directors and the like, and mates and other companies, funded grant writers. They earn their crust. They should be able to evidence their success, and make a pitch to you why they're worth it, or come and see part of the Innovate UK family. And finally, make sure you stand out. Innovation should be inspiring, groundbreaking, world-changing. If people aren't reading your application, and I don't mean your mum, it has to be somebody who's got that little bit more of a critical edge than your mother, because in my case, my mum loves everything I do. It really makes no odds. But get your critical friends to be the grumpy old middle-aged person and say, put on your grump hat and tell me, is this the thing that stands out? Has it got wow? And take it from there. Thank you, and I believe now I hand back over to Nigel, who's going to compare somebody else onto the stage.
First of all, we're
We'll get a round of applause first. Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, we've got time for some Q&A with Ian, and my apology in that I have I didn't change the slide very well, so we've got Mary Dillon, who's from Ian's team. We've got her Twitter account there instead of Ian's, so he's at Ian Tracey. Do troll him. He's always good to watch on Twitter. So I just wanted to add a couple of things. Stay where you are, Ian.
No, I'm just getting getting a glass of water.
The assessors that we use, as Ian said, they're human beings. They will look at things. They will not necessarily understand every single in and out detail of your application. There will be variation in the scores that they allocate to the applications that they read. So if we have 5 people, as Ian showed, one will love it, one will hate it, and 3 will go either, yeah, it's okay, that's not good enough, or they'll say, actually, yeah, that's really quite good, at which point it is good enough. We draw a line in what's called a moderation meeting, a funding panel meeting, and below that line we say, it's not good enough for us to consider. Innovate UK doesn't believe that the quality of the innovation is sufficient to take this forward. The assessors formally are saying to us that they don't consider that the quality of the innovation is sufficient to recommend to Innovate UK Loans Limited to consider that application for funding. When we see significant variation between the assessors in their scores, one might score it 90 and another one 20, and the rest of them somewhere in between, we will take a look at the comments, the scores, that variation in the assessor pool in order to understand whether there's truly an outlier in those scores. And we have the right within our moderation process to take out things that are clearly and justifiably shown as outliers to get to an adjusted score. We take that seriously. We prefer not to do it. And we give briefings, actually a very, very similar briefing to the one that we give to you. We also give to our assessors so that they understand what they're doing. Because we want to make sure that when we draw that line at around about 70%-ish, that sort of first-class degree that Ian mentioned, that I'm not familiar with other than through my daughter having one, we want to see those high-quality disruptive innovations. So that's my little two-penneth on assessors, because sometimes people are uncomfortable about them. Sometimes we have quite a lot of whines and moans about them. But they're human, and they're doing the best that they can, and we're looking sensibly at what they're saying. So after my little bit of once more pontificating, which is my style, as you know by now, questions for Ian. At the front, gentlemen.
Gerald. Hello.
Yep.
It is, yeah. Hi, Gerald Grigg-Smith at GGS Associates. On these outlier assessors, do you ever contact them individually if they've said something either very negative or very positive, just to validate that?
We will look at, one of the things that the assessors are required to do when they're going through applications is both to offer a score and also to write comments that are then fed back to you as part of the process as that the commentary and the feedback. We will read the comments against each of those scores that have been made by each of the assessors in order to determine whether something should properly be considered an outlier or just a genuinely held opinion that something is either the best thing since sliced bread or a complete complete load of drivel, let's say. I'm trying to be reasonably polite here, which is not like me. We don't contact them again in order to follow up on that, frankly, because we just have too many applications coming through and we're trying to whiz through on a quick process. If we think that after all of it, that, you know, if it were, for example, that, I don't know, one assessor had been considered as an outlier in every single one that they'd looked at, we perhaps wouldn't use them again. I would certainly think twice about it. But I'm not aware that that happens too often.
And the other thing I'd throw on that's assessor related is nothing stops people from trying to become an assessor, and that gives you an insider view. There's a process you have to go through, and there is definitely an open request at the moment for assessors to change the diversity of the assessment pool that we've got. At the moment it's male, pale, stale. If you're not one of those three, ideally if you're not all three of them, then please do make sure you get in touch with Innovate UK, because we want to refresh the gene pool of the assessment team.
Absolutely correct.
That was a good segue. Do you see how we did that?
I was about to say exactly the same thing. And we're also specifically looking for people who understand about next generation services for one of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund competitions. But yeah, the diversity pool in our assessors, yeah, we really need to work on that.
Cool. I'm Julian from Gummy Pod, and just wanted to know, you mentioned about all the appendices. Obviously, you've got word count limits and stuff like that. When it comes to extra stuff, how should we be looking at gauging that to support what we've written?
For the appendices, I would strongly recommend that you follow the detailed instructions that are in the guidance for applicants. In the normal briefing event we used to go through, this is question A7. You have up to 2 pages of A4 to add as an appendix in this case. God, that's boring. Go read it. If the instructions say you can have up to 2 pages of A4 as an appendix in a PDF format with a certain file convention, please do that. Because otherwise, A, we'll probably lose it, because we're using some crappy old, we're using the FTP site rather than the super duper shiny new innovation funding service. So we don't want to lose your appendix. If it's 56 pages in Word rather than 2 pages of A4, the competitions team may just ditch it because it's non-compliant. They have the right, technically, to ditch your entire application. Please don't make them want to do that. That would be such a criminal thing to do. But if you're non-compliant, you are technically non-compliant, so please don't be. And what they might end up doing is saying to the assessors, only read the first 2 pages, then it's fair. Then everybody is in a level playing field and we can get on with it. But the simple way to get it right is to read the instructions, please.
And I believe they're not meant to follow any URLs that you put in your
Correct,
document.
they will not follow URLs inside an application narrative. It's on that table, so there, and then we'll do.
It's a similar question, actually. Stephen Sanderson, E2E Group. You put the sort of word limit at 400, but some of these questions have about 10 sub bullet points to respond to, which gives you a very low number of words to respond to each point. Is it a strict limit, or does it or is it just fit in the box?
No, it is. If we say 400, we mean 4 2 zeros.
Okay.
It's actually. It may not, it's technically with this part A, it's fit in the box, which works out at pretty much 400. But check and be within the limit. And each question then has sub-bullets, not meaning that you have to answer every single one of those, but here are some things that try to explain what we mean by this question in case it's not blindingly obvious. So try and get that narrative across. Take Ian's advice on how best to apply there.
Expanding on that question, can you attach an appendix?
Yes, you've got 2-page appendices.
All right, okay. My other question is about team.
Team, yeah.
You said about Team A. Now, not all the research and development company will have a Team A, but they may be in a position to subcontract just in case if they have to be successful in this application.
yeah, we need to see a team that works, but that could include subcontractors, it could include non-exec folks, it could include mentors. It's in the roundest of it. And I personally see a lot of value in the people that you persuade to help you, because nobody is the perfect person. Even Richard Branson has flaws, for example. Sorry, Richard. And so it's for you to explain how, as an entity, the team has filled the gaps, and they might not all be people in the company.
So they don't essentially have to be executive directors of the company.
No, you just need to explain the connection
Can
between
be
you
an
and them.
advisory.
Yeah, advisory,
They can be
definitely,
advisory.
yeah.
The right people describe who they are.
Yep.
Thank you.
And justify. So particularly if they're subcontractors, justify why that subcontract organisation is being used. And if they happen to be, I don't know, based in Belarus because they're dirt cheap, that's probably not a good reason for using them. Have them because they're the right people, because they've come out of the former Russian Space Academy and they happen now choose to live in Belarus and nowhere else. And nobody else in the world has the capability that they have, and you've got a bargain deal for working with them. That's a much better answer than, yeah, I went to Belarus because it was dirt cheap and I don't want to employ any sensible people in the UK. We tend not to get comfortable with that one.
Thank you.
The next question is more related to the skill set of the assessors, and are they industry experts? Do they have their own companies? So how do you choose who the assessors for the projects
we look
are?
for people who have technical and commercial expertise that's relevant to the sector that you indicate as being yours in your application. In innovation loans, our preference is for those who have a history of, according to our internal innovation leads, our technology teams, of being good. We want people who've been briefed about innovation loans so they understand the context. And I suppose the way I sometimes put it is I'm less inclined to go for the pointy heads and more inclined to go for the bulgy wallets, but I want a sort of combination between the two. I'm not necessarily looking for the world's expert in particle physics because it's probably a he, sadly, is the world's leading academic. I want to know, are you going to get into the market? Perhaps more. So it's that combination.
So a follow-up question from there. So is there a kind of an agreement with the assessors about the IP protection for the... Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Confidentiality, IP protection, all of those things, absolutely. Including around market abuse and insider trading, things like that. We're particularly keen about that as well, bringing more good ideas. I think the gentleman at the front table.
From Folmac. If you found an application that is probably too good for the loan, in addition to the feedback, do you trigger a process for them to assess some other forms of funding?
We're not a part of the British Business Bank Treasury bank referral mechanism scheme because we're not a designated entity within that. So basically no. But what we will do is in all the feedback that we give, if we end up offering a decline, we will include within that things like a link into the business finance guide that's been mentioned earlier, a link into the British Business Bank's referral website mechanism, links to the BVCA, the UK BAA, growth hubs, things like that, to try and be helpful to people to whom we've had to say no. Okay. The lady in the striped top.
Hello, I wasn't able to make the morning part of the session, so huge apologies if I'm about to ask something that has already been answered. But I'm interested to know how the innovation loans relate to other types of funding that Innovate UK does. So can you apply with the same project that you've applied for a grant, and or does it count as match funding for other forms?
It cannot allow, so we have covered that. It's not allowed for match funding. It has to be a separate new project because they're both forms of state aid. So if you've had grant funding for a project, that project must have completed before the new project starts in relation to which you're applying for an innovation loan. So just to be clear on that. Sometimes we've had a bit of some interesting issues in applications coming through on that one. Thank you. The gentleman... Okay, we'll go for that and then we'll go to the front.
Yeah, my name is Godfrey Williams from Intellis. I think you've partly answered the question I'm going to ask. Can your application comprise partners from Europe? For instance, you have business partners in Europe. Can you have members of your team, so potential customers and all that? Pardon me?
How would you define partners?
There's partners, there's companies that you're already doing business with, and you have some innovative idea that will lead to market, but they play some role in the process.
So why would they be involved other than would you be paying them?
Not necessarily, not paying them, but they're contributing to the innovation process. And yes, indirectly, the time will be part of cost.
It's essentially meant to be a single company project.
The answer is we will provide a loan to a single business.
Yeah.
If you need to work with other people and pay them, they will have to be subcontractors. If they're doing other things at their own cost, because they're working closely with you and we're not funding them, we're not funding you to fund them, you're not funding them, they're just doing it because that's a good thing to do and there's business benefit for all of you involved in doing that, that's a crackingly good thing to do, and include it in the application because that's probably giving us the assessors a good reason to want to score your application more highly than somebody that's sitting in a dark room in a shed working on their own, tapping on a keyboard and being really sad.
Right. I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Kieran Thomas from Chitty-Bongo Pets. Many of the companies here will have innovative ideas that are patentable. So, as part of the application process, how much detail do you need us to go into so that we equally can retain the patentability? So can we talk about the high-level benefits and high-level what the product is?
It's covered underneath an NDA. So I think your bigger problem is going to be your word count rather than the detail you're giving away. So give away as much as you, write down as much as you require to make your point, being mindful of your 400 words, but the application is confidential, and so it shouldn't affect a patent application.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Simeon from Boatable Limited. I was wondering, is preference given to what is regarded as the assisted areas? For instance, certain parts of the UK, which are considered to be assisted areas or kind of deprived, like, Belfast, for instance, Leeds and Sunderland, as opposed to London, in terms of considering the benefits to the society. That's the first question. Do you understand it?
Yeah, so you're saying in the additionality, could you mention an additional benefit is I'm going to open up a factory, and I'm making all this up obviously, I'm going to open a factory in Belfast that's going to create jobs.
Yes, if the subcontractors, for instance, work in that area, does that kind of a preference given to that? As
I don't think preference is given.
No.
All right.
But it's easier to explain, but there is a benefit of creating those jobs somewhere. Right. I don't think there's an additional mark, for want of a better phrase.
I feel it's much easier to get some assistance in certain parts than in London, from my experience.
Innovate UK works across the whole of the UK. We do so on the basis of the quality of the innovation, not on the location of the activity. Right. In question 6, I think it's question 6, around the wider benefits of your project, if you're working in an area where there will be local economic benefit, then say so. That will help the assessors scoring that question to give you a better score than someone that says, actually, I'm going to be damaging things willy-nilly and not caring about it because I'm called Nigel and I'm an evil bastard or something like that.
Yeah. The second question I have is about is a business structure more important than, say, you've got patents already? Or
They're different things. So they'll be looked at separately.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Hi. I just would like to know if you have certain accolades behind the project already, as well as you've been through some cohorts, does that give leverage in terms of the innovative capabilities of the actual project itself when applying?
I would say yes. I mean, it's all evidence, isn't it? So if you're going to talk about personal accolades for the team, or if you're going probably less on the product because the product's pre-market, so it depends on what sort of accolade you're talking about, but anything to evidence what you're saying is always a good idea.
Yeah. Award-winning X, Y, Z is always better than Nigel, who's, you know, sad failure working in the public sector. Having said which,
wow.
We should move on.
Yeah. I think I'll leave now and leave you to that. Thank you, folks.
I forgot this is the recorded one as well. It's even worse.
Yeah.
Well, it's me. If people have seen other recordings, they'll have seen me saying the wrong thing as well. Okay, one final question before we get Cat up on stage to talk about credit.
Just one quick question about the assessors again. So if an assessor gives, one of the 5 assessors gives an invalid reason for marking something down, but it's not an outlier, maybe they give a 5 rather than a 1 or a 2, which would obviously flag it. Is the process in your moderation committee, does that involve discounting that assessor's bad mark for that question because he gave an invalid reason?
We would do our very best to look into that and see that. I can't guarantee that when I'm part of a moderation panel that I would necessarily be able to identify that invalid reason.
Yeah. Okay, because if they give a 5 instead of a 10, you've lost 5 marks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite serious, even though it's not an obvious outlier. But it's a question of how much time you have on the moderation committee. So I'm hearing maybe, maybe not.
We rely on the expertise of our assessors. I expect them to know more about it than I do, frankly. So, anyway, thank you very much indeed for all those questions. Please read the instructions. Read the slide deck when it comes through to you because it will have more of those instructions. Read the KTN, Ian Tracey's team's guide to submitting a compelling application about that part A of the project aspect of your application. The next part that you would need to think about is the part B, the business. And for this, we've got, actually I've got up on the slide there, we've got Catrin Dilloway and Joshua Shepherd. We haven't got Cat and Josh, we've got Cat, who is going to talk through Innovate UK Loans Limited's approach to credit and the process, and one of our credit specialists, who's actually a credit specialist, rather than me that's a blagger.
Wannabe credit specialist. Hi, my name's Cat Dilloway. I'm one of the 2 credit specialists in the Innovation Loans team, alongside my colleague Andy Wade. We're a small team. We have a credit committee made up of Nigel, our head of innovation lending, who you've already heard from today, our head of risk, Scott O'Brien, and our chief investment officer, Tim Sawyer. And they, as a committee, consider and approve, or sometimes amend, the recommendations that Andy and I forward to them based on the analysis that we undertake, with a lot of help from you. And we're supported by a lending operations manager, Josh Shepherd, who was meant to be here today but unfortunately couldn't be. And he facilitates the operational side of lending money. So forecasting our cash flow requirements, working with our lending admin partner to undertake the checks necessary to be a responsible lender, and that's your know your customer and anti-money laundering checks, and producing the loan agreements and security documentation necessary to facilitate our lending. And I'll talk a bit about documentation and operating the loans later on. So credit analysis, this is what myself and Andy do. We conduct credit risk analysis, and we do that under the principles that guide the underwriting of loans across the market worldwide, by which I mean the 5 C's of credit. So this will be in most banks, lending institutions, credit manuals, approaches to credit, lending policies, and so on. So firstly, there's your character, by which we mean your willingness to repay. And most of credit risk analysis can be broken down into 2 parts. One is your willingness to repay, and the other is your ability to repay. So with the best will in the world, sometimes things go wrong, and no matter what your character is, the funds aren't available, and a default is inevitable. And there's nothing that you can do about that. But in a lot of instances, when things get tough, it's someone's character that can make or break a facility in terms of our risk to you. So we use public sources of information to assess your character. So to the gentleman's point at the front earlier on, in terms of directors' credit history, we don't we don't look at the credit scores as such of directors, but we'll look at publicly available information. So evidence of county court judgments, previous insolvencies, director disqualifications, those sorts of things. And we'll also ask you to share information with us as your application progresses. And how you react to those requests either will or won't raise red flags at that point. So people who are super cagey about the details of their business plan, where their equity is coming from, where their equity is going to come from in the future, that probably won't incite a great deal of trust on the behalf of the credit committee in terms of entering into a 5 or 10 year working relationship with you that involves lending you large amounts of public money. The second point is capacity to repay. So this is more about your ability to repay. And we want to be additional, as we've already said, we want to be additional to funding that's already available in the market. And this is one where a lot of growth-orientated, scale-up, R&D intensive businesses will fall down in the traditional business banking market. So traditional commercial lenders will predominantly assess capacity to repay by the financial track record of your business. So that's to say a history of producing revenues, of profitability, a low level of leverage on your balance sheet, the typical questions that a commercial banker will ask of you when you apply for a business loan. So we're happy to put a larger emphasis on your capital position. We don't necessarily require a history of revenue generation. We're interested in how much equity you have on your balance sheet, how you're planning to raise more equity, if that's necessary to keep your business going in the short to medium term. We're also happy to take a view on your management team and your shareholder base as a proxy for commercial success. Obviously, having existing revenue streams helps, and if they're diversified and multiple in nature, then so much the better. But it's not necessarily a prerequisite for being eligible for an innovation loan. And the fourth point there is capital. So this predominantly refers to the equity in your business, and it's very important for relatively early stage scaling up businesses because they tend to burn through a lot of cash whilst they commercialize their product. So if you don't have that cash, or at least you don't have a credible plan to secure it, then that's obviously a problem in the short term. We expect you to have material equity on your balance sheet relative to the loan amount that you're requesting. Sometimes this might be in the form of directors' loans, which we would generously view as equity because we would expect it to rank junior to our facility, and it would require our consent for you to take those directors' loans out of the business at any time. So because we have that measure of control over directors' loans, we would be willing to view them as a quasi-equity product. But equity in whatever form needs to be there. In general, our ceiling of risk appetite for leverage is about 3 times on a debt to equity basis, but that's viewed on a case-by-case basis. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's a kind of general level we look for at a maximum. We'll sometimes be forward-looking in our assessment of capital. I think that's very important to highlight. So some of our loan offers that we've already made have had the effect of crowding in equity. So we've made a conditional loan offer when someone said we're expecting to raise 650,000 of equity in the first quarter of the project. We say, okay, well, we're happy to give you your conditional offer letter. You go out and show that to your investors who you're already talking to. And if you can get a commitment from them to co-fund with us, then we're happy for you to draw down funds. So this tends to only be appropriate for people who are already quite far down the road in discussions with investors. If an application says, and in year 3, I'm going to raise £5 million of a Series A round, there's not much we can do about that because 5 years down the line is too far away to provide any risk mitigation for the credit risk in the paper. But if it's relatively short term and it can be pulled forward, or it's a case of adjusting timelines slightly, then that is something that we can do. So the fourth point is conditions. As Nigel said, your loan offer will have a number of conditions attached to it. They're aimed at mitigating the risk that we identify in our analysis that we undertake alongside you guys. There'll be conditions precedent, so that's things you need to complete prior to your first drawdown. That might be evidence of compliance with certain regulation, GDPR, for example, if your business involves data handling. It might be key man insurance, if we think that your business is going to fly or die on the basis of the input of one particular person. It might be an equity raise, as I've said, or it might be the amendment of license agreements if you have key IP to the project that's licensed in from elsewhere. And then we'll also have conditions subsequent, so this might be the hiring of certain resources. We've had one successful loan applicant who's already drawn down, who are two guys. They're absolutely fantastic at what they do. They don't have anyone who can sell their brilliant product at all, which is a bit of a problem because we need revenues to pay us back. So we've said, great, start drawing down your loan, and within 6 months we expect you to hire a commercial sales director. So sometimes we might include conditions subsequent like that. Or in other cases around equity raise, we sometimes have conditions subsequent around equity raise if we're particularly keen on the management team and we really buy into their strategy. We might say that we'll fund a certain percentage of the loan subject and then continue funding based on satisfactory progress towards an equity raise within 12 months or something like that. And your condition subsequent will always include adhering to certain financial and monitoring covenants as set out in your loan agreement, and that allows us to monitor the health of the business on an ongoing basis. And then the last point is collateral. So we do take security for our loans. These typically take the form of a mortgage debenture, which provides us with a fixed and floating charge over the assets of the business, and a specific charge over any assets either purchased or developed with the proceeds of the loan. We may take a charge over license agreements where that's appropriate, but we are satisfied to be, in terms of security, we are satisfied to be the most junior of the senior lenders in the capital stack. So we expect to come ahead of equity, junior debt, any form of risk capital with upside potential, mezz debt with a kicker, directors' loans, anything like that. But if it's actual commercial debt, you've got an overdraft from HSBC, or you've got a business loan from Lloyds, or you could decide to go out in the market and get some asset finance from Shawbrook or someone, then we're happy to cede our priority and rank behind those sorts of lenders. And then on the left-hand side, it basically shows how we structure our analysis, and these 5 C's feed into those key points that we look at. So in terms of our credit process, it's a 2-stage process. We do a first look analysis based predominantly on the information in your application. As Nigel said, we deliver our loans under state aid regulation, defined in general exemption block regulation. I think there's a slide in the appendix on that, if you need some bedtime reading later, which basically states that we cannot lend to businesses that are an undertaking in difficulty. And what they mean by that in the case of limited companies is that your accumulated losses cannot exceed 50% of your subscribed share capital, which is a complete pain for R&D intensive businesses because, as I'm sure all of you already know, R&D tax structures incentivize people to write down their R&D costs to P&L, which means you end up with a large accumulated loss position. So we have to abide by this. We have to lend under the regulation as it's stipulated in GBA, but we do try and work with businesses to mitigate it. So if you have directors' loans, as I said, we'll view those as equity. We'll add those to your subscribed share capital position to try and make the ratios work. Or if you have an equity raise planned, we can make conditional loan offers, as I've said, on raising further equity, and that can be taken into consideration when we're analysing that. But it's something to be aware of, and it's very helpful if you take a look at it when you're writing your Part B, and if you fail it, then to say how you're planning to mitigate it or what equity you're planning to raise, etc. We take a first look at affordability, so this can be revenue track record. If your business is already revenue producing, we look at your forward-looking cash flows, how well capitalised you are, how you're going to service interest in the project period, how you're going to repay the loan in the longer term, and whether or not the credit risk associated with your project is binary. So that is to say whether or not our chances of repayment either sink or swim solely on the outcome of the project you're applying for funding for here, or whether you have a larger suite of revenue streams, and if this one doesn't work, then we've still got other sources of revenue to fall back on for our loan repayment. We'll look at the management team, the experience, the makeup of the management team, the shareholder base, the advisory board. So to someone's point earlier about advisors, please do include all the people who have input in terms of your management team, your management structure, corporate governance, and so on. People tend to put an Appendix B2 into their applications, which has an org chart and the CVs of all the relevant people. That's really helpful when people do that. And most of this analysis is undertaken from the Part B form, the business financial spreadsheet, and the associated appendices that you upload. I'd say the ones I focus the most on are the management team, which people put in under B2, and the business plan, which people put in under B4. And your business plan doesn't have to be 2 pages, so you can make it longer than that. I'm sure you need more space than that to explain your business strategy. So those tend to be the most useful parts. With the business financials form, please look at it in plenty of time before you submit your application, and please try and get an accountant of some kind to help you with it. It makes everyone's lives easier, because then you and myself and my colleague Andy are all speaking the same language. If we have really shoddily put together financial forecasts, it's really hard to do a fair assessment of your application. So my plea would be to look at the Part B business form beforehand and get help with it if you need it. There's templates that are put up on there. They are meant to be a backstop if you don't have accounting software already, or an accounting template, or your accountant can't help you, or whatever. You don't have to try and shoehorn your existing financial forecasts or templates into ours. You can just upload it as a separate tab. Because I've had some people say, oh, it took me ages to transpose all my accounts into your awful form. It's only meant to be there as a backup. It's not mandatory to complete the information in that way. So the first stage of credit assessment that we call credit triage that I've just described, that runs alongside and independently to the innovation assessment, which focuses entirely on Part A, because they don't get Part B, that goes to the assessors. And as has already been discussed, that's conducted by a panel of 5 independent assessors. And then we draw a quality line based on innovation, so applications over a certain mark are deemed to be deemed to be innovative enough to be eligible for a loan. We basically have a credit matrix, which is a sliding scale of creditworthiness and innovation, so that if things are creditworthy and above that innovation score line, they definitely go through. If they're marginal, or if your forecasts are terrible and it's been quite difficult to get the information we need, but you had a super high innovation score of like 83 or something, then we have a kind of matrix that allows for the really innovative applications to go forward, even if the creditworthiness is pretty marginal on a first look basis. So after this process, applicants are informed if they're progressing or not, and from that point on, all applications are treated equally. So from that point on, we're looking solely at the business function and the business strategy and the management team. If you're more innovative than another business, that, as per the innovation score, that isn't an additional point towards your application if you want at that point. Everything's treated equally after the line draw. So either myself or my colleague Andy will get in touch with you. We'll likely ask you some more questions about the information you've already provided in your application. We'll arrange a time to come out and meet you and your team and see your office or your factory or your power plant or whatever it happens to be. And the outcome of this is a second, more detailed piece of credit analysis, which we present to our credit committee, who make the final lending decision. So unlike with innovation grants, where they outsource, the innovation assessment is outsourced, you get a list of most innovative to least innovative, and you basically have a pot of money and you work down the list until you run out of money. All of the decisions on who to give money to in the innovation loans programme are all undertaken by Innovate UK itself, or by the credit committee of Innovate UK Loans Limited. So we recommend, as in myself and Andy recommend, terms, a security package and a covenant suite at that stage, and then that's either accepted or amended by the credit committee, and their decision will form the basis for the specific terms in your loan agreement. So lending decisions, so if our recommendation is positive and the credit committee agree, it could be that our recommendation was negative and they overrule us. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it will at some point. Then you'll get a conditional loan offer. So a condition precedent will always be a management presentation to the credit committee, preferably at your premises. And this presentation will be similar in substance to an equity pitch. We're not allowed to call it an equity pitch, but it basically is an equity pitch, except it will focus more on the project that the innovation loan is funding rather than just the business and the team and the strategy, but we would expect us to see information on all of that as well. There's sometimes some back and forth on terms. The terms are relatively fixed. The loan agreement is in general warm and fuzzy document as commercial loan agreements go, I would say, and it's been presented to a number of equity investors and angel investors for their feedback, and we've been told that it wouldn't provide any block from their point of view in terms of providing equity funding into a business where they have already taken out an innovation loan. But on a case-by-case basis, there might be a reasonable demand for amending certain terms, and we'd always advise that you have a lawyer go through the documentation with you. I think the standard form loan agreement is going to be available on the FTP site for you to download if you want to have a look at that. And then before execution, we obviously do our relevant due diligence. So this is your standard know your customer and anti-money laundering checks that you would have to undergo if you opened any bank account. And we make sure that you have proper authorization from your board to borrow and from anyone who might hold a negative pledge as an existing lender into the business. So operating your loan, your designated credit specialist / relationship manager, who would be either Andy or myself, would work with you to close out your loan agreement. We'd make sure that all your conditions precedent were satisfied, and we'd actually get your first drawdown to you, which obviously is the whole point, is getting cash out to innovative businesses doing cool things. You'll have a monitoring officer in the same way that you would in a grant process, and they baseline your project with you within 60 days of your first drawdown, and they'll monitor your project on a quarterly basis for the duration of the project period. And every time you want a drawdown for your next payment, you'll submit your latest quarterly accounts to me or Andy, and your monitoring officer will complete their quarterly report. And if we're both happy, and by me being happy, I mean you're in compliance with the covenants that you've agreed to in your loan agreement, then we issue your next drawdown. And the loan is basically broken down into 3 periods. So you'll have your availability period where you're drawing down the loan, and your extension or commercialisation period where you've drawn down all the loan but you're still scaling up the commercial activity. And those 2 periods together make the project as a whole, and that period is interest only, so you'll only be paying interest on capital outstanding at that point, and that period will be monitored by a monitoring officer. And then in the repayment period, the project's finished, the monitoring officer falls away, and you'll start making capital repayments on your facility, and that will then only be monitored by me or an equivalent credit specialist. There's no monitoring officer at that stage. So that is how it works in practice, or in theory anyway. Are there any questions?
Hi. A quick question on the Part B. You mentioned there's a template for providing the accounts, but it can be given in a different format. Can you repeat that point once again and explain in a little detail?
Sure. So there's 2 parts, I guess, to the Part B, or the Part B of the application, or what's additional to a normal grant application. And that is a Part B Word document where you're asked a series of questions. How many questions is it, Nigel? 7 questions about your business. So your business strategy, your management team, your funding strategy, those sorts of things. And then there's a spreadsheet as well, which is called the business financial spreadsheet, which has a bunch of information that we do need in the format that it's there. So there's something called the state aid template, which is essentially the drawdown profile you want, and it calculates interest and those sorts of things. But there's also historical, as part of that business financial spreadsheet, there's a historical financial section, so your business to date, and a forward-looking financial forecast, and that's a balance sheet, P&L, and cash flow. And we've put in what we think is a helpful template if you don't have anything to work off already, but those aren't fixed fields. Like if you want to add in extra tabs and put in your own financial forecast model, that's absolutely fine. And often the best applications we get are ones that do that.
Hi, about the drawdown profile, is it possible to have a really large chunk of it up front, or do you always have it spread out with multiple drawdowns?
No, so the drawdown profile is meant to be in line with what makes sense for your particular project. So if that might involve a large amount of expenditure up front for capital purchase, capital equipment purchases or something. And we have had, so we made our first loan offer in April. We made our first drawdown in April, and they're already £1 million drawn. So they drew down 700,000 in their first quarter and 300,000 in their second quarter. So no, it's completely what's in line with your project. It does become difficult to make condition subsequent equity raise offers if your drawdown profile is very front loaded, because it's impossible for us to mitigate our risk that way. If you're already fully drawn within 6 months, there's no point having that condition subsequent. So yeah, it's case by case, but no, it's absolutely possible.
Hi, my name is EJ. In a regulated business like a fintech or a payment system, you'd need to have collateral in terms of cash with the payment schemes like Visa or MasterCard. Can that be used as collateral? Can the funding you get be used as collateral? Can the collateral be the security deposit with the payment schemes, for example? I don't know if that makes sense.
The answer there would be no, because that would not be an eligible project cost.
All right.
I think you mentioned that the deadline is the 5th of September for entries. I'm not sure if you've mentioned sort of the timeline after that when we could expect a response.
Probably is.
Okay. Yeah, there is something in the slide deck on this, but the deadline for registration is noon on the 29th of August. Deadline for applications is noon on the 5th of September. We promise to get back to applicants by the 19th of October to say whether or not you're being taken forward for detailed credit analysis. If there is detailed credit analysis, that's sort of a flexible thing. It could go through really, really quickly if Cat doesn't have too many questions and you have all the answers perfectly in place and there isn't much discussion around the loan agreement and it all whizzes through quickly. Or it may be quite an extended period where there's toing and froing about things, where someone goes on holiday and doesn't know the information, or the due diligence means that asking 3 questions to triangulate on what's the real answer takes a bit of time, and so it could go on and on and on. Our guesstimate is that first drawdowns in this competition are likely to be around December-ish.
So if I could just add to that, in our first competition, we got back to people about mid-March, and first drawdown was on the 6th of April, so they were really, really on it. There was, as Nigel said, not very many questions. Where there's conditions around equity raises, that obviously takes more time because you're going out to investors, pitching. So yeah, it's dependent. After we get back to you, after the innovation quality line draw, that then moves as basically as fast or slowly as the business can allow.
My suggestion around questions is that my suggestion around questions is grab Cat and or me. You get more sensible answers out of Cat than you will out of me after we finish. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to have someone. I know this is going to sound really rude to you, Cat. Have someone real come and talk on the stage. So thank you very much indeed, Cat, for giving the story around our approach to credit. But it's our innovation loans and other briefing events can be really boring because it's just someone from Swindon reading out the instructions. There you go. So I haven't had that reaction before. It'll stop me being rude about Swindon. I'm really, really pleased that Steve Leece from CitiLogik has agreed to come along and share some of his views and experiences on, I suppose, a couple of topics. One, how to scale through innovation, and two, what it's like actually to apply for and receive an innovation loan from Innovate UK, because Steve, I'm very pleased to say, is one of our first cohort of innovation borrowers. And we're linked on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn tells me it's your birthday today as well. So happy birthday to Steve. We don't need to sing, though. So over to you, Steve. We've got sort of 10, 15 minutes, and I have no idea what you're going to say.
Yeah, isn't that dangerous? Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me, and I feel now full of trepidation because you've sort of set me up as somebody who's an exemplar. What I'd like to do is give you some reality around this, if I may. Please take it as my views, not of the Innovate team, but I think my views, well, hopefully they're aligned also with what's been going on. So maybe just if I give you some context about us and our relationship with Innovate, how we approach the competition, and how we're now doing now that we're drawing down the money, and it may be useful. So firstly, just let me characterize our company. We're 3 years old. We have 10 employees. We're based in the Future Cities Catapult here in London, and we turned over about $1.5 million last year. Our whole company history has been based around Innovate. So we got a 25k loan about five years ago. That was before the company really was fully operational. We got a small grant from TfL, another 25. But ultimately, the first stage of our company was based on our own endeavours. So we've been able to put about £1 million into our own business, but that's hard, as many people will know. Probably the big change for us last year was winning first of a kind. So we won £1 million fully funded on the 1st of April. And in order to win that, we had to build, test, deploy, and validate a full technology system in a real scenario. And by the way, we just as context, we understand movement by vehicle, by foot, by public transport using the 3-4G network, and we're backed by Vodafone. But we had to deploy a full capability. So when this competition came out in November, we were effectively about 10 months through. In fact, no, a bit less than that. 8 to 9 months through a program of putting some technology into the marketplace. And we were confident enough to predict that if we did deliver that, we were looking for the next stage. So there was a little bit of, okay, how does this loan fit into our company? We'd also won another Innovate competition on the 1st of June, which was with DfT, with rail, and we've also just won a third. Now, it sounds great in practice to win 3 competitions worth $2 million, but there is clearly a cash flow issue. If you haven't done an Innovate program, it's on average 100 days between getting your doing some work and getting your tranches of money. So growing the business with Innovate has been very positive, but clearly has added a lot of cash flow pressures to the business. So we saw a need to raise some more money to build the platform fully out. So just to remind you, $1 million already in the platform, $1 million from Innovate effectively at that point, and we needed more for a longer runway to have a stable team for 2 or 3 years. So it came at a very good time for us in terms of the competition. Just on the wider context of Innovate, if you're not involved, I always do believe whatever you put into Innovate, you get out. We've been on 5 trade missions. We're fully into the community, and I would suggest that's the only way to really get the value out of working with Innovate. I mean, clearly we're all selfish as small companies, but ultimately it is about what ultimately you put back in. Okay, so that sort of gives you a sort of sense of where we got to by November. So we got all the forms, and the first point from our perspective, again, take of it what you wish, we took it very seriously. We took it as a Series A loan raise. And when you look at the forms, look at the questions, it's incredibly difficult to fill it out in the space that's available unless you're highly structured. So we sat down and worked out an answer to every question in advance, and then we melded it all together, and it took us about 3 weeks. Okay. Now, the reason we took such care in that was because we did want to get our Series A documentation out at the same time for future use. And it's very hard to tell a story if you just do it in prose unless you go through a structure. We also brought our accountants in for 2 weeks, and that cost us money. But we wanted to really drive through the analysis of how we were going to apply for the money. Were we going to ask for it up front? Were we going to ask for it on an even basis? You know, how we're going to approach it. And also, I would add, only the people writing this were the directors of the company. because we regarded it as that important. So when that application went in, I did say to my fellow directors, I will be gobsmacked if we don't get through, or if we don't get through, we should give up now, because quite clearly we've put our best into this. And that was in November. And when we did get notification on the Section A from the independent assessors, I was quite pleased to see very consistent high marking across the piece. And it has been a theme that we've seen in the other competitions as well, is if we really spend time on trying to answer the question well, you do get good marking. We wrote one bid perhaps not quite as well previously as we should have done, and it was really picked up by the assessors because they're very sharp. Okay, so that was the Section A, which was what are you going to do innovatively. Section B was also quite tricky because there are a lot of questions in there which effectively a Series A investor would ask. So again, we went through a whole process. So effectively, I remember very clearly on about the 23rd of December, having finished it, and we even got everybody in effectively to red ink it between Christmas and New Year. So I mean, we were deadly serious about this. So we then got to a point when we got notified where not only did we score well, but also the plan that we put forward was relatively intact. And the questions we got were more about the balance sheet of the company and the future of the company. So far, so good. I think there were some interesting points that came out at that stage because Nigel and Kat, they do a good job of due diligence. So don't imagine this is a quick look. It's a lot more than that. And one of the areas that they picked up with us as a small team was resilience. And so one of the areas that we focused on was bringing a deputy for the technical director because we were asking for money over a period of time. And there was an issue there. So I can say that we did bring in the head of platform engineering on the back of this money. Okay, so that was one of the key things we did. So what conclusion did we come to in regard to the money? We looked at getting it up front, but I think as was alluded to, it doesn't necessarily help you in the long term. So we believed that the key thing was, given we'd already built a platform, was getting a three-year stable capability underpinning for the technical team, such that we could continue to build out the capability. And so what we knew is if we won it, is that as of the 1st of April and beyond, i.e. every 90 days, we would be asking for our drawdown. And we got $1 million, by the way. So I can now say with certainty to the person I hired and also to the team that you got 3 years to do all the R&D that we need to do. And that was the philosophy we did. Now, on that basis, we then had to work out the cash flow, looking at an ever-increasing loan coming in clearly into the company and the ability then to pay not only the interest on the money, but also to pay it back. And so the business model had to stack up over 8 years. So we've done a full 8-year business model as well. But what we do feel now, with this behind us, is very confident. I mean, I can walk into the VC, which we are currently doing, because we're going to Series A now, saying, okay, the government's giving me £1 million. Where's the $1 million you're going to match? And because we've done all the work, 95% of those things we needed to do have been done. And we sharpened it up even further during the due diligence with Nigel and his team. So we were notified that we got the money. We notified there were some preconditions around liquidity and the team. We've taken all those on board, which we monitor. And we then had to move into, I suppose, the initiation phase. And the point about the initiation phase is if you haven't been through an Innovate assessor regime before, you then have to deal with a full plan with the assessor. And that's then got to show all the deliverables because the IP is the underpinning collateral that you're creating. So we've gone through a whole process again of project managing it properly before we started. But again, it's helped us because it's really set the course of the R&D program, the deliverables each quarter, et cetera, et cetera. And that kicked off in May. And we took the first loan payment, and the team has worked through that. And we're just about to go through our first assessment, Q1 assessment, and then we'll be drawing down more money. But you can see the amount of effort really to get it going. Oh, my apologies. Monitoring. Yeah. He's the assessor. Yes, that's my fault. But having done it last year, again, on first of a kind, we were very comfortable with it. But it does force you to raise your game a lot because you've got somebody all the time marking you on what you're doing. But hey, if you're going to get this level of funding, it's not without effort. So how do we see this going for us? Well, we're trying to get away from the Innovate funding, which is clearly very spiky. We're trying to get to a more sustained cash flow as well as our commercial work coming in, and really settle down the business for Series A. But there's no doubt that having got through this, the conversation with the VCs is so much easier, or easy as it can be anyhow. So what I'd say is, I suppose my key learnings from it, if you don't put the effort in the beginning, it's going to come across as quite wordy and not very hard, and there are a lot of people who are maybe better at it than you, and therefore you won't win. The board's got to be absolutely behind it. And personally, I don't believe outsourcing this works. That's just a personal view. And then once you're into it, it doesn't get any easier, because we're going to have to prove this on a continual basis for over 3 years. But if you're up for that challenge, it's a good team to work with, but they will hold you to what you say at the beginning. And I've had to fully involve my board in order to achieve that. But I think it's going to create a transition for us. The final point, I suppose, for us is we are looking to internationalise. Now, this money is for the tech. So we still have the problem of fully operationalising the business abroad. But that's what VCs are for, or your own funding. But I hope it gives you a sense of the journey that you can go through and the pitfalls. I suppose I'd be happy to take any questions from that point. Yeah, so the question was about contingency. So we have stress tested our model. So, I mean, we have a very good accountant, and it's difficult with a small company when you don't have a full-time FD. So we have a very, very capable partner-level accountant, and we have stress tested the model from our perspective. I know it's probably been stress tested also from the other perspective as well. But we basically asked for the money in a very steady state. So there is the argument, if things started to deteriorate, either ourselves or Innovate would see, let's take an example, 12 months in, that this was not going to work, and there's cut-off points. I think the danger of taking all the money up front clearly is you're pretty much committed to your programme, whereas I think as a board we would be comfortable to curtail the programme in a year's time if we honestly felt that the business was not progressing.
So you had taken the quotes from all the subcontractors or the manufacturer, whoever were involved to deliver your project?
Yeah, so one of the key things about this is IP's got to be created in the UK. It's got to be within your own company. It's got to be tangible. It's got to be verifiable. And we did have a supply chain, but we decided to bring some of that back in house because we wanted to see all the IP land into the UK entity. We had a subcontractor we've used last year who's Irish, but it was very clear that was not sustainable really under this program.
And you had any reserves to extend your IP?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
You had any financial reserves to expand your IP?
So yeah, we've got a small amount of money to protect the IP as is. With the VCs, we are looking to go much more significantly into IP protection, but we feel comfortable with where we are at this present moment.
Thank you.
A question about the collateral. So you borrowed £1 million, and what was the value of your collateral, and how much of that was IP, and what was the rest?
Yes, the way I understand it is that we're creating IP, and the IP that we are creating effectively becomes the collateral that we effectively are held against. We bring in the background IP clearly already, that is within the company, but this is effectively a hold over what you create with the money. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me come on here and explain the answer to that. Although this loan is collateralized, it's not based on a collateral valuation. So it's not like a mortgage on a house where I'm going to buy a house worth £100,000, therefore the bank will lend me £80,000, or the building society will lend me £80,000. In this case, equally, it's not unsecured, so that we're not just lending money to a company. We're taking a fixed and floating charge, a mortgage debenture, as Kat said, over the overall assets of the business, so that if something goes horribly wrong, we have a seat at the table, along with other creditors, but a seat that's not right down at the back of the room in that event. We're taking specific security over IP developed and assets purchased with the proceeds of the loan. And that's to be honest, that's more about protection from fraud and people borrowing money, developing a whole load of IP, collapsing the company, keeping hold of the IP, putting it into a new company, making a ton of money, and not paying back the taxpayer. That sort of Phoenix arrangement would be fraudulent, or at the very least it would be entirely unsatisfactory for us when we're managing public money. So we take this security, we don't ascribe any value to it. We consider that if the loan goes bad, we lose everything. We will try not to lose everything, but in the credit risk analysis that we do and in the reporting that we do to Innovate UK Loans Limited, to Innovate UK, to UK Research and Innovation, to BEIS and to Her Majesty's Treasury, we say, if this goes bad, we lose the lot. I hope that explains from a technical point of view. Now, back to the more interesting stuff, hopefully.
Hopefully. You mentioned that you got this project for 3 years, part of research and development, but then where does it come into the commercialisation? Obviously, you've got a project going for 3 years, so after your 3 years, is that when you're expecting to go to market? Are you going to market before, or is it a bit of both going on at the same time?
Yeah, so our technical director took a view that we needed about £3 million to get to a technology readiness level 6 capability, which was what we aspired to. And we had got it to around technology readiness 3 late last year, before we started the first of a kind. First of a kind allowed us to go from 3 to 6 fully tested operational. So as the loan kicks in, we're already hit technology readiness level 6, and that we did achieve that on 363 of 365 days. So on the 29th of March, we had a platform that worked. We actually sold our first subscription on the following day. Okay. We see the journey we're going on is taking the core platform now from TRL 6 to TRL 9 over 3 years and adding in a series of additional component pieces which are at low level. So effectively the money is predominantly to upgrade the resilience of everything we're doing and bolt in additional pieces. So we are commercialized already. It is a very advanced beta now, but if we're going to have it in the market for a long time, that 3-year program of continual refinement is a criticality from our perspective.
And was that part of your application when you put it in?
Yeah, so it was
you
very
identified you're going to be implementing this stage and then developing to higher
levels. We said this is exactly where we are now, or we will be on this date, and we everything we said we then achieved, because clearly they were very aware that we were in the middle of this program, and then we nailed it and said these are the 5 components, and this is where we are, and this is where we will be, and here's a roadmap, and here's a plan, and this is what we're going to do over 3 years. So absolute clarity of purpose, and the technical director has spent a lot of time working at that roadmap.
And just finally then, the commercial bit that came in, did you kind of foresee thinking, okay, I've reached that level, because you was like, well, it came the next day, so obviously you'd already preempted that from this you're going to be going into a commercial level pretty much instantly, so exactly. You've got another bit coming on. So was that already kind of in place to go, okay, I've reached that level now, here we go, it's going into market for a certain level?
There's a lot of Innovate loan stuff out there in EU money, but one thing that's very clear is that you have to have a very clear path from where you are TRL-wise. It's a relatively simple scale in one level, pilot to, I suppose, advanced pilot to fully operational. We have a very clear view as what each of these Innovate competitions we're doing, and every time we bid, we say this is where we are and this is where we'll be by the end of this piece of money. So in this case, we're absolutely clear to Innovate that this loan is the final element of fully operationalising the business and bring it to a level. And the most interesting point is that the clients who we're talking to now are much more confident in adopting this because they see we've got a 3-year path. I think if we'd taken all the money up front, it would not have been so clear to the clients, but we can tell a story. I would add, by the way, we're going for 3 years and 5 years payback. We've missed out the 2 intervening years in our case because we felt that we were well enough forward with first of a kind to go into payback in year 4. Cool. Maybe famous last words, but that's what we did.
Maybe one last question before we wrap it up.
You stated that the directors had to be sort of fully committed to the application and analysis phases. Yeah. Could you give us an indication of what percentage of the senior management's time and other time was absorbed by the application and analysis phases, and how, if any, disruptive it may have been to the rest of the day-to-day business?
So I mentioned earlier that we always write the bids ourselves, and we get the team in a room and do it. We just get on with it. So because we've done it 3 times previously, we've refined our capability, our approach as a team. But we took a week out, basically. It was actually very convenient. It was a quiet week just before the Christmas period, and we just got everybody in a room and said, we're going to do this in a week, which we did. So I'd say we lost a whole week of time, and then we had 2 weeks of paid work by the accountants to support that. So we did spend a little bit of money on top of that. But that way we only lost 5 working days, which I think was good. And I think ultimately we own the plan, which is probably the key thing now. I mean, that is our Series A plan. I mean, we had to give a presentation about a week after we presented this to you guys, and we actually have the Series A written. I mean, it was great because we just transitioned it. Oh, and I should make the point, we had to go and present as well to Nigel and his team, and we took that very seriously as though it was a Series A presentation. And it paid dividends because we had every slide. We have the slides now all set up. So if you feel it's a good mechanism to do 2 things at once, which we believe, which is Series A plus loan application, you will get massive benefit from it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Okay, that wraps it up. We're nearly 1/4 of an hour late, and I do apologise for that. But this slide you've seen before. Please look at it again. Please read the instructions. They're online. If you're in any doubt and you need clarification, contact customer support in Swindon, and they will chase me and hound me down to make sure that we give you good answers to those questions. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your patience, for your attention, for the really high-quality questions. Thank you very much indeed to everybody that's been online for your patience and attention, and I believe some of the questions have been fed through and answered offline. Or online rather. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. If you think that an innovation loan is suitable for your business, if it's the right sort of support to help you carry out that later stage R&D, to give you that clear route to commercial success so that you're really going to grow your business and succeed as a result, then we would really welcome your application, particularly if you're doing something really, really innovative, and particularly if this is the right, suitable sort of instrument for you. We'll have fun looking at it, and hopefully you will join the cohorts of innovation lenders. Thank you very much indeed. In the